A nutrition scientist tells us everything that we should be eating and what to pay attention to in the health space. Does that sound like something that you want to see? Well, I'm glad because I want to see it too. Let's see what he has to say and let's see if what he says is correct, shall we?
Have you noticed you can watch 10 videos on nutrition and get all kinds of contradictory advice and come away more confused than you went in?
Yes, absolutely. It's actually one of the reasons why I'm here. And I've talked about the reasons for why that is, and it mainly has to do with the fact that people are looking at nutrition through the wrong lens. But look, I mean, the title of the video is "I studied nutrition for 30 years. Here's what actually matters." So, since he's someone that has spent decades in the field, he should know what he's talking about, right? So let's actually hear what he has to say about that.
And scared of every food and frustrated, and you just feel like giving up. Truth is,
Yep. That's how most people feel about the nutrition space and nutrition generally because of how contradictory everything is in the space. You have to wonder, if everything's so contradictory, then is the lens by which people are looking at health through the right one? It's a question. It's not necessarily true that it isn't, but something to ask.
because most nutrition content on social media is not that helpful. It misses the point entirely. What's worse, it trains your mind to ask the wrong questions. And this
Correct. That is 100% correct. People ask the wrong questions. They ask what is healthy versus what isn't, right? It's a good question on the surface, but then you have to dig into what healthy actually means and how it's informed upon in the realm of human nutrition science, and, well, things start falling apart from there. But anyway, we'll continue.
is really tragic because nutrition applied correctly is unbelievably powerful. Heart disease, cancer, diabetes, even dementia are massively impacted by your diet.
I 100% agree with that statement. It is imperative that we understand how we ought to be eating and how we ought not to be eating as human beings. It is extremely imperative. Because what people are putting into their mouths and what they're not putting into their mouths, all of that culminates into a presentation, a health presentation that, well, looking around, is suboptimal, to say the least. It is dismal. It is a grim reality that we live in. So I'm glad that we are on the same page. Mr. Gil Carvalho. That is his name. Gil Carvalho. So, yeah.
So getting the wrong advice isn't just a complete waste of your time, it also deprives you of life-saving information. I've spent the last 30 years studying medicine, biology, and nutrition. I've published my own scientific studies, and I've had the privilege of interviewing some of the top researchers on the planet. And in this video,
Okay, so we're looking at nutrition researchers. Right. So they must be experienced. They must really know what they're doing. They must be able to responsibly convey research. I'm sure that they've probably done plenty of their own research. All of that matters. All of that matters tremendously. So, let's continue.
share with you exactly what my family and I do and eat to achieve and maintain exceptional health. I'll
Right. Well, that's great.
give you every tool you need so you can build delicious, healthy meals for your family.
Okay. Cool. What's listed on the screen is sort of, I would suspect, is giving us an idea of what he is considering to be healthy and unhealthy, or really healthy, and what he believes is appropriate to be consuming and all that stuff. So we'll get into that, though. He hasn't made that claim yet, so we'll wait until he says that or says something like that.
And you can also spot bad nutrition advice, and you can finally stop wasting time with stuff that just doesn't matter.
Right. And that's exactly, I mean, look, Gil and I are on this complete same page in terms of the statements that he's made about the confusion in the health space, the contradictory advice in the health space, and also the fact that this needs to be resolved because diet is extremely important in achieving optimal human health. And the fact that we need to focus on what matters versus what doesn't matter. We need to actually focus on the things that matter so that we can cut through the noise in the health space and acquire a very strong signal, so to speak. completely agree with Gil on every single front here. So this is looking very promising. Very, very, very promising.
I was recently writing this long article answering every frequently asked question on nutrition that you guys ask, and I'll link that below for you. But I realized it all boils down to 5 really simple principles, and they're so
Okay. Well, it's interesting. So with my with the framework that I employ, it really comes down to one fundamental framework, and one fundamental rule, principle, and not 5. But 5 is still pretty simplistic, right? It's pretty easy to comprehend. So yeah, yeah. If you're watching right now and you're interested in any of this, comment below, comment in the live chat if you're watching live. Make sure to do that. Make sure to do that. Don't be shy, because I'm curious to hear your thoughts as well. Curious to hear your thoughts.
incredibly powerful because they give you peace of mind, and we can cover them in minutes, as you'll see. And by the end, you'll be able to judge nutrition claims immediately if it's something serious or if it's just fear mongering. So here's the first principle. A food is a combination of many different pieces, of many different nutrients and components packed together in a specific structure. And
Okay, so hold on a second. That's an interesting way of framing food, because last I checked, we are an animal. It depends on what context you're speaking within, because we have many differences with the rest of the animal kingdom, and especially with regard to our intellect and the fact that we can entertain the abstract world and we can think about things in the abstract and all that stuff. But biochemically, physiologically, we are animals, and most things in this world, including the tree outside, the tree trunk outside, is made up of exactly what you just said. But of course, we wouldn't consider that food. So I'm sure that Gil doesn't believe that a tree is food or something like that. But that means that the definition needs to be a little bit more refined. A combination of bits and pieces of nutrients and vitamins and minerals or whatever, that is part of what makes a food a food. But of course, we wouldn't consider something like tree bark to be food. And I'm sure that Gil wouldn't. I'm sure that if he heard me saying this, he would acknowledge that that's something that needs refinement.
each of those building blocks can have a separate, specific effect on your health. For example, when you eat an avocado, you're not just eating fat.
Correct. You're eating lots of different things. Also, whenever we talk about fat, we have to consider the different types of fat that make up the fat in an avocado. What's the primary type in terms of its saturation level, in terms of its chain length, because the chain length actually, that's going to influence the way that your metabolism functions a bit, because they're metabolized differently. So that's part of it. But of course, it's not just fat, like you said, and you're consuming some fiber in that. You're consuming some vitamins and minerals, of course, and there's different. When we talk about vitamins and minerals, we're talking about the different types that they come in. So you can have heme iron or elemental iron, and those are different molecules, and therefore they're absorbed differently, and they're incorporated differently into the body, and all that. So it's another thing to consider as well. So yes, you're absolutely right, Gil.
Also eating all kinds of vitamins and minerals and something called zeaxanthin, which promotes eye health. And
Well, so hold on a minute. What do you mean by promotes eye health? Where is your evidence to suggest that it promotes eye health? What are the actual studies that support that claim, or more specifically prove that claim, Gil? So you talk about like what matters and what doesn't. And I know that this isn't precisely an audit of science that you're providing here, but you did make a claim, and so I think that I think we're all curious. If zeaxanthin's really great for eye health, we want to know where that claim comes from, because again, everyone is very confused in the health space. There's a lot of contradictory information. So someone else might say, not necessarily that zeaxanthin is bad, but someone else might say that perhaps it's not as good as people say it is, or it's neutral, or it's misunderstood, and all that stuff. And so it's really important to provide us with these citations and the specific claims, or the specific resources by which your claims are being derived from. Zeaxanthin is one of these molecules that is talked about quite a lot. And so it can be misrepresented and misunderstood quite a bit. So when you say it promotes eye health, I'd be very curious to see the science behind that claim.
scopolamine, which has anti-cancer activity.
Okay, so here is the problem. Here is the problem. I think it is safe now to talk about the precise issues with what this nutrition researcher is conveying here, what he's describing, and what he's asserting right now. So anti-cancer. Let's break down that claim. Anti-cancer. We have to ask ourselves what precisely is being claimed here. He is claiming that this specific molecule, scopoletin or whatever. I've never even heard of it before, but fine. Okay, we learn something new every day. He is claiming that this molecule has anti-cancer properties. It engages in anti-cancer activity. In other words, it discourages the growth of cancer. Maybe what he means is it prevents the development of cancer. It's slightly different. I mean, those are two different things. But either way, no matter what he means, no matter what it means to say anti-cancer, in order to prove that claim, in order to actually provide sufficient evidence to responsibly make a claim like that, you have to provide us with, or you have to conduct a study that shows that this molecule in isolation, with every other variable controlled, so as to mitigate and eliminate any possibility of confounders and collinearities, etc. Because this molecule can also react with others, potentially all that stuff. We need to control it. That molecule in isolation is directly causally related. So there must be a mechanism as well, but not merely a mechanism, not strictly a mechanism. There needs to be more than just a mechanism, but there does need to be a mechanism that it's directly causally associated with either the elimination of cancer or through some methodological method, that we, through some methodology that I am not aware of. We need to establish that it is shown to prevent the development of cancer somehow. Now, let me ask you, my dear viewer that is watching this right now, does that sound like something that is plausible, financially feasible? Does it sound like something that is feasible generally to do and to provide? Or does that sound like something that can be sort of approximated? We could sort of try to get to that point, but only up to a certain point, until eventually we have to either opine about whether it's anti-cancer as a molecule or not. I think you probably know the answer to that question. It happens to be the latter. Now, not to mention that most of these claims about molecules being anti-cancer in nature actually come from really, really poor data. So it's not even that we're being very rigorous. It's actually coming from epidemiological data, longitudinal data. So that's when you have to understand biostatistics. And Gil, of course, he's been doing this for 30 years, so I'm sure that he understands it like the back of his hand and he knows how to do this properly. But biostatistics is even more complicated. It has to do with, hazard ratios and all this stuff. But there are so many, dozens and dozens, hundreds of confounding variables and collinearities that are impossible to control for. Not to mention that this science oftentimes employs multivariate regression, which is a specific statistical method that involves adjusting for your outcomes by basically stacking a bunch of univariate regressions on top of each other. And as a result of that, inflating the power of the result, and sometimes to a point where you actually change the result to something completely opposite of what was actually observed. And so all of this to say that saying that this molecule has anti-cancer activity or exhibits anti-cancer activity is irresponsible language for you to be using as a nutrition scientist. Now, I'm sure it's just one little error and it won't be done again. I have faith in Gil to not make this mistake anymore. So we're going to go ahead and see what is said later, but it's just a little bit of a problem here. If you want to be able to dissect health claims like this, if you want to, you actually want this level of clarity. I have my book written, Contraindicated, that provides you with the framework for clarity. But if you want to, before you get your hands on that, if you don't have your hands on it already, you can get a little bit of a quick little health claim decoder. It's the 8 questions to ask in order to before accepting any health claim. That's in the description below. It's a little PDF. You just put in your first name and your email, and you get it for free. And you can see just a glimpse into what's going on in my head whenever I observe or encounter any health claim like this. So that's for you. Description below. So anyway, let's continue.
And the list goes on and on. An apple, a simple apple, is not just carbs.
Correct. It is also fiber. There's also vitamins and minerals. There's also sorbitol. So that's a sugar alcohol, actually. There's also deuterium, which is heavy hydrogen. So there's many different molecules within this fiber. There's also polyphenols in the skin. There's which are considered phytochemicals or sometimes phytonutrients. There's many different things in an apple. So that's absolutely true. So I suppose that the reason why he's saying this is because there's a lot of people online that, provide you with rhetoric that leads you to believe that apple equals carbohydrates in a sort of unconscious level because they don't spend a lot of time or emphasis talking about anything else in the apple. However, I would provide you with a little bit of insight and say perhaps that is because that is the most significant element of an apple in those people's perspectives, and therefore that's why they spend a lot of time talking about the carbohydrates in an apple, and it's not their fault that a lot of people have a takeaway that involves carbohydrates equaling apples, or vice versa, apple equaling carbohydrates, rather. So it's just a little bit of feedback here.
Also eating quercetin, which fights inflammation.
Okay, so again, when you talk about a molecule that is directly involved in fighting inflammation, do you mean on a molecular scale? Do you mean on a broad level? Does that translate to the broad system? Or is that based on a cellular biological study paired with a bunch of longitudinal analyses that have completely uncontrolled confounders involved, and oftentimes involve, prospective cohort studies with absolute differences between the populations with respect to their primary outcome variables that are negligible, that might as well not even exist in the first place? Is that what it's based on? Because if that's what it's based on, then therefore it is irresponsible to be saying that this molecule fights inflammation. Because again, it might, in a medicinal sense, on a molecular level, fight inflammation through a specific mechanism, but can you actually say that eating molecules from that are derived from certain foods, like for example, I think he's implying that, apples have this quercetin or quercetin, however you want to pronounce it, molecule, are going to result in lower absolute inflammation on a net level in the body, like lower net inflammation. I mean, Gil, you acknowledge something that we both agree with, which is that a food is not merely made up of one of its constituents. However, in the same breath, you then are focusing on quercetin and saying that therefore it fights inflammation, and necessarily implying through your rhetoric that apples are anti-inflammatory. But again, apples are more than just quercetin. They're also carbohydrates, as you just said. They're also fiber and heavy hydrogen and polyphenols. So there's lots to consider here. And so when you realize how much there is to consider, you might question whether there's a better framework that sort of accounts for all of this noise in a better fashion. Maybe a system that involves the adaptation to all noise, no matter how much exists. And that happens to be the frame that I operate within, and perhaps we'll get to it later on in this video. And if you want to learn more about that, or if you're curious about learning more about that, again, the lens of clarity, before I get into that, again, you can look into the getting the health decoder, but also if you click the link below, you will be able to have access to my email as well, so that you can communicate with me about this book, Contraindicated, of mine as well, which you may or may not have your hands on already. So let's continue.
Anthocyanins, which promote heart health.
Right, so you say promote heart health. So that is a cause and effect claim, Gil. So this is another thing that I want to get out of the way. Fights inflammation, promotes heart health. These are causal claims. And so when we talk about the concept of causality, you have to be very careful with when you invoke that concept. Because we all know that association doesn't equal causation. This is live, don't worry, not pre-recorded. We all know that association doesn't equal causation. We all know that, right? At least we should. But it's not sufficient. It's not sufficient to just say association doesn't equal causation and then call it a day. Say that you understand it, right? You have to understand whenever you are making causal claims when you don't even realize it, when you're drawing causal conviction from associations. Now, it doesn't just have to, in other words, what I'm saying is that it doesn't have to, transgressing from that principle, breaking that principle, doesn't just have to look like you saying, this causes this whenever it's actually associated with this. It can look like that, and oftentimes it does. But it can also look like saying, quercetin fights inflammation, particularly whenever you are implying that foods with quercetin therefore result in a lower net inflammation state. Now, sometimes that's not being implied. Sometimes that conclusion is therefore followed from this, in which case it wouldn't be what's it called? Post hoc ergo propter hoc, fallacy, which is, association equals causation. That would be a non sequitur fallacy. But still, it's something to consider whenever you are making claims like this, because you've been doing this for 30 years. You've been talking about it for 30 years. I'm sure that you understand that whenever you make claims like this, you're making certain implications. It's not just about what you are saying explicitly. It's also what you're saying implicitly that matters. So, sometimes you never know what you're implying. Sometimes people can pick up on implications that aren't there. But it's just, this is some constructive feedback for Gil for his future videos.
All kinds of different vitamins and different types of fiber. Even if
different types of fiber, yes. But yeah, fiber nevertheless. Yep.
Food like olive oil, where most people think, no, that's just pure fat, right? That's all. No, it has a...
Yeah, no, that's not true. There's also polyphenols in there as well. There's other molecules as well. You've got polyunsaturated fats in there as well. I think there's a very, very, very small amount of saturated fat, but I think probably it's near zero. I mean, it is near zero. But yeah, okay. And also there's different types of olive oil. I mean, you've got ones that are cut with seed oil and all that stuff. So all these things need to be considered. You were absolutely right, Gil.
Plethora of vitamins and carotenoids and other phytonutrients. Oleocanthal is formed in olive oil and it has an anti-inflammatory activity. And so it's a...
Right. So here's another question to ask. He's saying that all these things are anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory. They're I think those are the main things that he's been saying. There might be one other. Either way, another thing that you have to ask yourself is there anything else that might be even more anti-inflammatory if we are able to establish that these things actually are anti-inflammatory and et cetera, et cetera? Is there anything that can be even more anti-inflammatory? We also have to ask ourselves, what is inflammation? Should we eliminate all of it? How are we eliminating it? Are we eliminating it in a proper way, in an appropriate way, or perhaps in an indicated way, in other words, in a way that our genes are most evolved to tolerate or most adept at tolerating? We have to ask ourselves those questions as well. So just some more questions to ask yourself whenever you're encountering these claims. Again, there's 8 of them, the 8 foundational ones that I have provided for you in the description below, through the link below, because it will provide you with lots of clarity immediately. So you're welcome.
Long list. It goes on and on. And so the realization here, the bottom line, is that the health effect of the whole food is the combination of the specific effects of each of these molecules.
Well, so Gil, I want to ask you a question. So you say that, and there's an element of truth to what you're saying. Absolutely. There's absolutely an element of what you're saying. You're basically saying that you can't just look at a molecule in isolation. You have to look at the whole food and then see how they all operate in tandem with one another and what's the absolute sort of net effect of that food, therefore, subsequently on the body. But again, I would ask you, whenever you're talking about the net effect of a food on a body, is it appropriate to only consider the nutrients, in other words, the vitamins, the minerals, the micro and macro elements of them, so carbohydrates, protein, fat, or is it also appropriate to consider what the anti-nutrients are? So I think that you might actually talk about this in this video. I don't want to jump the gun. But doesn't that have an influence over the net effect on the body? And whenever we talk about the net effect, how are you actually establishing what the net effect is from a certain food or a certain diet even on the body? A diet is more than just one food. And it's not just about food. It's also about eating behavior. So time between the time between eating. It's also influenced by what else you're doing. It doesn't just have to be diet. Health status is it's about all of the factors that you're affected by. It's about all of it. And so when you actually realize that the science, the human nutrition science that he extols so passionately and zealously, is something that is actually quite noisy and quite intimidating to sift through, you might consider, once again, changing your frame to something that provides you with a stronger signal because it actually accounts for all that noise in a different way. And that actually happens to be the field of evolutionary biology. In other words, we are an animal, and therefore we have a specific way that we ought to live in accordance with in terms of behaviors that also include eating behaviors. And if you deviate too strongly away from those behaviors, that poses a risk to the organism. Diet is a very influential part of that behavior because it has such an intimate effect on our genes. And so I completely agree that diet has a very, very significant effect on our health status, on our longevity, on our health span. I completely agree with that. And Gil and I agree on that. So we have common ground. But what's happening is there is a disconnect between us when it comes to what lens or what foundation we are operating within in order to discern between what is appropriate to eat and what is inappropriate to eat. Gill is suggesting that we ought only to look at the nutrients and the vitamins in a food. At least this is what I'm sort of gathering from this. Perhaps I'll elaborate further and I'll correct my view. And I'm saying, let's not even look at the constituents per se. Let's actually look at what, from all of our available inferences from hard sciences that provide more signal than noise, a stronger signal to noise ratio. That's actually what grants it or allows it to have the name hard science bestowed upon it in the first place compared to soft observational science. Why don't we look at those foods, or why don't we look at those fields of study to discern or infer to the greatest of our ability how we ought to be eating and how we ought not to be eating, according to the Darwinian principles of evolution and the subsequent principles of indication. We shouldn't be looking at what is healthy versus what isn't, according to human nutrition science. We should be looking at what we ought to eat versus what we ought not to eat, what we're most adapted to eat and adapted to tolerate genetically, and what we're most adapted to not tolerate, I suppose you could say. It's a weird way of putting it, but point still stands, according to evolutionary biology. While understanding that we live in a modern context and there's some marginal changes that can be a little understanding and perhaps even forgivable. So that's what I have to say at this point.
Trying to guess the health effect of a food from one isolated nutrient in a vacuum gets things wrong all the time.
Correct. There's a video that I have called the Reductionism Epidemic, which is precisely about that. This is a phenomenon called reductionism. It's known as reductionism. That is exactly what that is. Thank you, Gill, for providing us with the warning of that way of thinking.
This is like the blind man and the elephant. You've heard that story. You've all heard it. One blind man grabs the leg of the elephant and goes, an elephant is basically like a tree. It's a cylinder. The other blind man grabs the ear and says, no. An elephant's this flexible, round leaf almost. The other grabs the trunk and says, no, guys, the elephant's basically like a hose. It's a long, bendy tube. They all have a current.
Right, but you can also say the same thing. Reductionism has scale. That's one example of reductionism. Here's another example of reductionism. This elephant is found in this forest, and therefore forests are made of elephants. That's another form of reductionism, just on a broader level. But except it's not. It's also made up of other animals. And so the reason I bring that up is because when we talk about certain, you can say what you're saying correctly, that you can't just isolate a nutrient and then say, therefore, this food is healthy. If you isolate the nutrient and it suggests that it's a healthy nutrient, you can't just say the food is healthy. But similarly, you can't just take a food from someone's diet, suggest that it's healthy, and then say their diet is healthy because of a certain food being in it, or a certain amount of something in their diet being healthy or something like that. Therefore, the diet's healthy. It's not appropriate. So anyway.
Of truth, but they're all missing the big picture. None of them grasp what an elephant is. This is such a simple principle. You could explain this to a child literally, and I invite you to. And yet it's so powerful. You grasp this, and so many dilemmas that puzzle millions of people online every day, they just dissipate away. Should we?
Right. That's a great example. I think that another great example of what he's talking about is actually the idea that the Mediterranean diet is a healthy diet. Right? Because what they do is they take certain foods from the Mediterranean population and they say, well, they're correlated with stronger health outcomes. And therefore, if you have a diet that's made up of these different foods, that makes up a Mediterranean diet and therefore it's healthy, right? It's just, I'm sure that Gill would agree with what I'm saying here through the same logic, right?
We all avoid beans and be scared of beans because they contain lectins. Well,
Right. Okay. So now he's going to use this as an example of why we should perhaps be, using different arguments to discern between whether beans are something that we should be eating or not eating. It's just something that's sort of fallacious logic, right? Just because beans have lectins doesn't mean that you shouldn't be eating them. And I actually agree with that statement. It's not about beans having lectins that suggests that we shouldn't be eating them or something like that. I think that's a very poor argument. But let's let him continue, and then perhaps we can elaborate further on what he's saying.
These also contain minerals and different types of fiber and phytonutrients. So,
right. So what do you think? I want to ask you, since you're watching this right now, I want to ask you what he's saying right now. What is he implying with what he's saying? As much as what he's saying is explicitly correct, right? Everything he's saying is correct, and I completely agree with it. What is he implying by using this example? And also, based on what we can see, based on what we can discern or ascertain from what he has said in the past for years and years that he's been on YouTube. You think he's maybe implying that we should be eating beans and that this argument is representative of reductionist thinking and therefore a poor argument for suggesting that we shouldn't be eating beans? Is that something that he, therefore implying that we should be eating beans, going back to that original point? Is that something that he's suggesting? Does that sound like something he's suggesting? Because I think that's what it is. So, Gil, the problem here is that just because poor arguments can be invoked to discourage people from eating certain foods, that doesn't mean that anybody discouraging people from eating that given food is doing so through fallacious logic. Yes, fallacious logic can be used to justify a position, or at least attempt to justify a position. Also, sound logic can as well. Okay, you're saying lectins are present in beans, and that's a poor argument for suggesting why we shouldn't eat beans, because you're taking a molecule in isolation and suggesting that this is therefore going to have negative effects on a systemic level if you eat beans. That is absolutely correct, that is irresponsible logic. Okay? However, let's talk about what the irresponsible logic is that you just employed subsequently, directly after you just discounted that argument. You said beans have minerals, fibers, and minerals and different fibers and phytonutrients. Well, let's just touch on minerals first. What other foods have minerals? Does meat have minerals? Yeah. Does tree bark have minerals? Right. And so, again, we need to consider this. We need to consider this whenever we're looking at a food. When you realize that a food is made up of so many different things, and you realize that just observing the intake of a food in a certain population over a given period of time can't really establish what the health effect of that food is, whether it's positive or negative, because of so many different confounding variables that can actually counteract each other, that can, introduce more noise into the picture and actually can flip a result backward from what you might expect, from what the food is actually doing to their body. When you realize that, you might consider changing the frame. I keep saying this for a reason. And whenever you actually look through that lens, the question becomes different. The question becomes not whether beans are healthy. Are beans healthy? Are beans unhealthy? Are they good for longevity? Are they good for health span? The question then becomes, how well are our genes designed to tolerate the consumption of beans, especially regular consumption of beans? Or the regular consumption of fiber, the regular consumption of phytonutrients, the regular consumption of minerals of a different type than you might find in foods that, inferentially speaking, we are more designed to tolerate genetically. Because plants have different forms of minerals than animal products. The question becomes different, and that's precisely why I promote that way of thinking, because it's going to arrive at different conclusions. It doesn't mean that it's the wrong frame. In fact, it's actually a more superior frame because it provides a stronger signal. It is a more predictive framework, it's a more predictive theory than statistics is. Statistics, the predictions formed with statistics are very poor. It's one of the reasons why most studies cannot be repeated. The repeatability of studies is really, really poor because the prediction model that they put forth is very inadequate. But with evolutionary biology, the predictions that puts forth are very minimal, actually. They're very broad and minimal. They're first principles kind of positions. And those happen to be very, very, very reliable predictions. And so you might expect that to be you might assert that that's a better theory, a more superior theory than the one that you're putting forth. And not putting forth explicitly, but at least deriving your conclusions from. So something to consider, Gil, because this is a serious problem. This is a serious problem. You are someone that has been doing this science for 30 years, and you're very proud of that. And I don't have any problem with that. But since you're proud of that, and since you're very ostentatiously presenting that, especially in the title, particularly in the title, you might want to be a little more rigorous and a little more responsible with your reviewing of this material before you espouse it online.
What's the actual health effect of eating beans in human beings? We have piles of...
Okay. You can't inform upon that because effect is the conjugate of cause. And there are no studies that can inform upon the effect, which again is conjugate of cause, of any food or behavior on any heart health outcome or disease process as it relates to any aspect of human nutrition over any given period of time. Because in order to actually do so, you have to control for factors that you cannot control for. Genotype and phenotype are ones that you really can't control for at all. You cannot perform experiments on human beings. The field of statistics is not pseudoscience, okay? We need it sometimes. We need it a lot, actually. But for specific questions, if I ask you a question of how many reps How many sets of how many reps of a certain exercise should I perform? Okay, for maximum hypertrophy. I can't really look at evolutionary biology to answer that question. I have to perform statistics. I have to do that. And that's fine. But you can still acknowledge that it's important while also acknowledging its limitations properly and responsibly. And that's what I'm doing here. You cannot inform upon cause and effect with the science, particularly whenever you're observing cases that are completely different from one another in terms of their behavior. Inferential statistics is most properly applied to situations wherein your cases are basically identical. This is why it's very useful in engineering to observe the activity of a production line, for example. Okay, I've interviewed a data analyst that understands this very well, like the back of his hand, even more than I do. His name is Thomas Matcham from the UK. And I would link it in the top right corner of the screen, but this is live, so go ahead and check that out, called Cause and Effect in Statistics with Thomas Matcham.
Studies documenting this. We see better control of blood sugar. We see lower cholesterol. We see weight loss.
Well, so hold on a minute. Better control of blood sugar. Could that have been achieved by anything else that those people were doing? What were those people doing? What were those people not doing? Has this been borne out in all studies that have been considering this variable in the first place? Okay, over what period of time, under what level of control, in what types of studies, prospective cohort, strict longitudinal with one population, randomized control trials, a mixture of all of them? Okay, what were the sample sizes that were actually, observed here? What was the signal to noise ratio on the primary outcome variables? We don't know any of this information because you're not providing it to us. The second thing that you have here is lower cholesterol. So lower cholesterol is a begging the question fallacy because that implies necessarily that that's a good thing. You're saying that that's a good thing, which means that you're suggesting that cholesterol is a problem. A problem with respect to what? Ostensibly, that would be, well, heart disease, in your opinion. You can check out a video that I just did yesterday. It's in the live tab on my page on YouTube. It was on cholesterol. Cholesterol, good or bad. Okay, and I dissected that issue quite eloquently, frankly. If you want more information on that. Long story short, it is not a problem. There's no evidence to suggest that it's a problem. There's no evidence to prove that it's a problem, is what I should say. Okay, and there's actually counter evidence to prove that it's not a problem. And actually, just going back to control of blood sugar, again, let's say that you were right in drawing this causal relationship, which you're not. You're transgressing from what your responsibility is as a scientist. Unfortunately, a scientist of 30 years, at least someone that studied nutrition for 30 years, but still, it doesn't matter. This is a shame. This is a shame. You have transgressed your responsibility with your rhetoric. This is irresponsible rhetoric. But let me ask you, Gil, even if you were correct in this, even if it were responsible to draw a causal relationship here, could this have been achieved with anything else? Like, for example, what if we cut out carbohydrates entirely? Now, I'm not going to say whether that's appropriate or inappropriate in this video, at least at this point. But let's say that happened. Could you get better control of your blood sugar that way? Well, I would presume, yes, you would, because at the end of the day, blood sugar is tightly controlled when you cut out carbohydrates entirely at a very steady level. It only rises in a demand-driven fashion, so only when you need it. Now, again, I'm not going to say whether it's appropriate or inappropriate at this point, but that needs to be considered, doesn't it? So again, and then we see weight loss. Yeah, you also see weight loss if you cut your leg off, for example. So it also depends on what method you're actually employing to actually acquire or achieve that weight loss, right? Now, of course, that's a little bit of an absurd example, but that's not the point. The logic is what matters. How did you do it? Weight in the form of what? Did they lose a bunch of muscle? Because that's not good. Weight in the form of excess fat going down, that's suggestive of something good, right? Indicated, perhaps. But weight in the form of muscle being lost, I don't know if that's ever appropriate unless you're some sort of bodybuilder that's being taken steroids or something, right? So that's a problem.
We see less heart disease. We see...
Okay, so what do you think the mechanism is there? So I will correct myself. He's not making a causal claim. He's saying that we see these things. But again, the same questions remain. What were these people doing? What were these people not doing? What else were these people, what else were these people doing and not doing? All that matters.
Longer lives in people who eat more beans. So I eat them all the time. I eat them.
Okay, so now he's made a mistake. He's made a mistake. He said, so I eat them all the time. So he's now just drawing, oh, well, therefore I eat them all the time because, well, look at all that. We just see these associations. Yeah, that's great. I mean, look, we also see an association between margarine consumption and divorce rates. And so I decide, and therefore, since we see those associations and they're repeated actually across the board, I decide to keep my margarine level low because I don't want to get a divorce with my future wife. She's my fiance at the moment, hence why I said that. But you see how it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't really make sense to say that because association doesn't equal causation. Like, this is ridiculous.
Daily, beans and lentils and legumes like that, and I give them to my family because we actually know what the documented health effect is.
No, you don't. Wait, hold on a minute. You just said effect. So now you are making a causal claim. So you now have transgressed your responsibility as a scientist again. So this is very unfortunate that Gill is representative of the nutrition field. You will not only see Gill making this mistake. You will see multiple scientists making this mistake of transgressing away from what the responsibility is because, first of all, they were never taught it. And even if they weren't taught it in the right way because they weren't taught how to apply it. They weren't taught that certain language is actually implying a causal relationship, even when they don't realize it. That's one part of it. Another part of it could also very well be that they just don't care. They don't care. We are creatures of order. We crave order. We hate chaos, and therefore, language that represents ambiguity, we have a natural adverse reaction to. We have a natural sort of gravitation towards the ordered language, even if it's irresponsible to use it. But the problem is that is extremely dangerous in many cases. Because as soon as you start saying that X causes Y, when you don't have sufficient evidence to say that, you are now erring on the side of, you are now lending credence to, for example, certain governing bodies and government agencies putting regulations on certain food products and other products that are not at all causally related to whatever else is going on, to whatever primary outcome variable that's being observed and cited. You're not doing that at all. You're now being, this is very irresponsible of you as a scientist. And it shouldn't be this way that I, as someone that isn't a scientist, is telling you how to properly report your data, which isn't your data. It's data that you've encountered online. It doesn't matter. This is very, very unfortunate. This is shameful. And I mean that with all due respect.
In spite of all the speculation. In reality,
in spite of all the speculation. Really. That's interesting. So this is an exhibition of arrogance. This is a presentation of arrogance, whether Gill realizes that or not.
Some lectins can cause issues. They can cause gastrointestinal distress, but...
Well, on a mechanistic basis, we see how lectins do so, but it's not just from a mechanistic basis. We combine mechanistic data, biochemical data, with evolutionary context, and not just evolutionary context in the sense of seeing what we're designed to eat and what we're not designed to eat, but also seeing why lectins exist in the first place. Lectins are plant compounds that are specifically developed by a plant in order to discourage predation. In other words, to discourage animals from eating them. Much of these plant compounds are insecticides and pesticides. That's what they are. And so that's not to say that by the very nature of them being such, we have no ability to counteract their effects. We shouldn't be consuming any amount whatsoever. That logic in isolation does not prove that. It's not sufficient to proving that claim. But when you look at all the converging lines of evidence and you put together what the net sort of image is that it paints, you realize that lectins are most probably to be avoided within the framework of evolutionary biology. And I'm not going to cover again, but I will say it again. That provides a stronger signal than the field of science that you are in. Necessarily, it does. There's a reason why psychology, the field of psychology, which uses the exact same science that you're referring to, is called psychoanalytic theory. It's because it's all theory. Now, evolutionary biology is also a theory. But again, when you consider the fact that they're both theories, then you have to consider how accurate are the predictions of the theories. It's just a question.
The heat wipes them out.
No, it doesn't. Why did you say that, Gill? Why did you say that the heat wipes them out? As if it eliminates all of them. The heat. There are different cooking methods. Pressure cooking employs not only heat, but massive amounts of pressure, and that seems to kill off most of them. Absolutely. But not all of them. And so when you're talking, look, the image on the screen is not a pressure cooker. This is something else. That does not wipe out the lectins, quote unquote. It eliminates some of them.
So the normal processing of the beans, the cooking of the beans, already solves the problem. So
no, it doesn't solve the problem, Gil. If the problem is considered to be lectins, in this case, by someone, then cooking them with the method that you just provided to us on the screen does not eliminate the problem. The problem is not eliminated. So again, this is arrogance and ignorance. It's unfortunate ignorance.
Theory versus reality. Should we avoid oats and all?
Okay, so should we avoid oats? Again, wrong question. The right question to ask is, how genetically adapted to the consumption, the regular consumption of oats are we, genetically speaking? Based on hard sciences like comparative anatomy, all within the framework of evolutionary biology, but therefore the relevant fields of science that are harder fields of science. Anthropology, so chemical anthropology, some observational paleoanthropology as well. Comparative anatomy, certain elements of our biochemistry, and I think there's one other. Those are the three main ones, frankly. But those are the three main ones. Again, all undergirded by a foundation of evolutionary biology. There you go. And when you ask that question, you start realizing, oh, well, whenever we started to rapidly increase the production and cultivation of plant foods, particularly things like cereals and oats, we saw massive decline in our structural robustness. We saw dental caries developing. We saw crooked teeth developing, structural problems at our occiput in terms of our development there, missing teeth. We saw lots of that, plus a decline in our stature. Consistently, very rapidly, since the Agrarian Revolution. And so you might say, okay, those are inappropriate. And then in order to describe some of the things that they do to us on a mechanistic basis, so we see it on a broad level, what it's inferentially doing to us, then we can dig into the mechanisms and say, okay, well, now we see that lectins exist and they do this inside our body, and that could be a problem. We can trace that biochemically. So again, taking one of those things in isolation, like the mechanistic data, and then extrapolating that to the entire system of the entire system, and not only that, going even further to extrapolate to the whole species, that would be irresponsible. What isn't irresponsible is using that as supplementary evidence for the actual source of the claim, the actual claim that is the strongest for supporting this point, which is based on evolutionary biology. It's the framework of evolutionary biology. Just a thought. That's the correct question. So, in other words, if we use that question and answer that, and then use the answer to that to answer this question, should we avoid oats? The answer is probably yes.
Whole grains, because they contain phytates, they contain glyphosate.
No, but it's not because they contain that. Also, glyphosate is an even worse argument, because that is a consequence of industrialization. That is not a natural element or constituent of oats. That is because of human intervention. But to be fair, since that is there, that still should make you consider whether we should be eating conventional oats at the very least, even without evolutionary biology in the picture. But again, it still goes back to that. Glyphosate is a very new molecule, isn't it? Therefore, it influences our physiology, which is something to consider through the lens of evolutionary biology, because we are an animal.
Contain avenanthromides. They also contain 1,000 other things, viscous fiber and phytonutrients and minerals.
So he's implying here with the colors of these things as that they're good. Okay, but meat contains minerals, and not only, here's the other thing. He's implying that minerals are all the same. So Gil, would you say that all minerals are the same? I would say that you wouldn't say that. I'd hope that you wouldn't say that, because it's not true. There are different. Iron is not just iron. You've got elemental iron and heme iron, for example. You have beta carotene, and you also have actual vitamin A, which is retinol, the active form of beta carotene. And we have a very poor conversion method for beta carotene into vitamin A. That's a problem. Fiber, for example. Well, what does our evolutionary history suggest about fiber consumption? I don't know. Look, binge my public material, get your hands on this book, and you'll find out.
What's the actual health effect in a human being eating them? We have hundreds of studies doing this, giving people oats. We see lower blood pressure.
Right. So does quantity mean anything regarding the quality? If there are a million studies that still have the same errors that I just put forth, does that mean that therefore the conclusions that are reached, the net conclusion in that massive 1 million study meta-analysis means anything? In fact, it could actually mean even less than if you just had 2 studies, because noise and error compounds. It doesn't multiply. It does. It multiplies. It doesn't add up. It multiplies. So there you go.
Sure. Lower cholesterol, less body fat, lower risk of developing diabetes.
No. Risk is a cause and effect term, Gil. So you've now done this again, where you have misstepped. If I tell you, I don't understand why people are denying this. If I say to you right now that if I feed you, or if you eat oats every single morning, that decreases your risk of cancer by 32%, that is literally making a causal claim. That is making a causal claim. Nobody would dispute that. No one would say, well, that's not what risk actually means, because everyone knows what risk means. Risk implies probability. Probability implies causation, actually. It does. You're saying there is a 32% chance. Okay, all these words, they imply causality. When in reality, it wasn't a probability that you measured, it wasn't a chance that you measured, a hazard that you measured, a risk that you measured, any of those words. It was an incidence rate that you measured that you've now just conflated through frequentist methods of statistics into a risk because you wanted to. That's not how it works. If I study 20 people and I'm looking at the incidence rate of heart disease over the course of 5 years, and I find that those people, there was a 40% incidence of heart disease, yikes, like heart attacks, for example, that was in direct correlation with a shared behavior among those 20 people, let's say the consumption of potatoes or something like that. It is not only irresponsible of me to say that the 40% increased incidence was because they were eating potatoes, because that's still a cause and effect statement, even though I use the word incidence. That's still a cause and effect statement. It's also irresponsible for me to say that there was a 40% risk of heart disease in the group. Because if I ran that study again, could I guarantee 40% would happen? Or would it perhaps be 35%? You can't guarantee the same thing will happen. It was an incidence rate. There was not an increased risk. You have no idea about that. You don't know. It's not how it works. If I do that same study again, not going back in time and doing it, I mean like taking another set of 20 people that are basically identical to those people, doing the same things, can I guarantee there would be 40% of them that would die? No, I couldn't. So it's an incidence rate. You were saying risk when it is irresponsible to say risk. So again, you were imbuing a sense of conviction into these people, into your viewers. You're beguiling them with a sense of conviction that has not been earned.
I eat oats all the time, almost every day.
That's a problem. You do you, but that is a problem.
I give them to my family. The children in my family eat oats all the time because the health effects we see are overwhelmingly positive.
Okay, so overwhelming is a value judgment statement and usually just used as a term of emphasis, like veritable is a term that's used for emphasis. It doesn't really mean anything. And second of all, effect is once again, to iterate, the conjugate of cause, and therefore it is irresponsible for you to be using that word once again. I'm going to continue saying that so long as you continue saying words and statements like that.
Here's some overnight oats with berries I just had the other day. I didn't stress over the bad molecule that might be in there. I just enjoyed it because I know what the overall health effect is.
No, you don't. Because the science that you were referencing and citing implicitly does not inform upon the effect.
Should you cut carbs or fat from your diet?
Well, look. Okay, fine. Let's go ahead and look at that. Let's go ahead and observe that question here. Let's break that down. Which of those macronutrients is, one, actually a macronutrient by the very definition of macronutrient? And two, is what we are most designed to tolerate genetically across our genome from every inference that we have. Well, it happens to be fat. What he is going to do is he's going to continue referencing human nutrition science. Now, we already know what his position is because he's eating oats, which are filled with carbohydrates, berries, which are filled with carbohydrates. So we already know where this is going. But take a look. I want you to observe. This is educational. This should be entertaining and educational, okay? Take a look at what he is going to do so that you can identify this whenever anyone else does this. You know exactly where he's going to go. Is he going to talk about evolutionary biology or is he going to talk about human nutrition science?
Which one is good and which one is bad?
Wrong question. Good and bad are value judgment statements. They're not scientific terms.
Is carb poison? Are fats good for you? Are fats bad for you? These are the wrong.
Okay, great question. Except for the first one is actually something that, well, it's still not the best question because it assumes that you must cut one of them out, right? Which, again, if you're just freshly investigating this, that's not something that you should just assume. So, okay, fine. Wrong questions. We got it.
Questions, guys. It completely misses the point of nutrition. A whole macronutrient like carbohydrate or...
False. Carbohydrates are not macronutrients. So you don't even know the definition of a macronutrient. Now, a mainstream institution can say carbohydrates are macronutrients, blah, 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 all they want. If you actually look at the new Oxford American Dictionary, you will find the definition of macronutrient is not what you might expect. It will lead you down the path of what a nutrient is, which will also be something that you may not expect. And you will find very quickly that carbohydrates are not macronutrients. Meanwhile, protein is a macronutrient and fat is a macronutrient. Something to consider whenever you are arriving at conclusions.
Lipid or protein is neither good nor bad. It depends on...
Okay, what you mean by good or bad is something that you just criticized yourself by saying it was the wrong question to ask. So I don't even know why you're using the words. It depends of the food it comes in. It depends of the food it comes in. Okay, so a little bit of a typo. Okay. Carbohydrates are carbohydrates. Gil, yes or no? Yeah, you answer yes or no in the chat or in the comments if you're watching this after the fact. Yes or no? Irrespective of the source, carbohydrates are carbohydrates. Okay. The answer is yes, and I'm sure you know that. The answer is yes. Now, does that mean that carbohydrates will enter your bloodstream at the same rate, irrespective of what form you eat it in? No. Which might be what he's getting at. But let me ask you something. If you were to consume, I don't know, a small amount of arsenic, a non-lethal amount of arsenic, if you were to consume a non-lethal amount of arsenic, and you had the choice of having it enter your bloodstream slowly or having it enter your bloodstream quickly, what would you say to that offer? You have two options. If you said that you would want to have it enter your bloodstream slower, you're almost on the right track. Because, of course, it's a poison and you would want it to enter slower. But here's what you should respond with. Why do I have to choose it all? Why don't I just not consume the arsenic? Now, am I saying that carbohydrates are arsenic? No, obviously not. Am I saying that carbohydrates are alcohol? No. Every single toxin has different strengths. But it doesn't preclude glucose from being a toxin, particularly exogenous glucose. Glucose is essential for survival. I could not be moving my fingers without glucose. Fact. Exogenous glucose is not the same thing. It's the same thing in terms of what its makeup is. It's a molecule. Glucose is glucose is glucose is glucose. However, that's like saying, well, we create testosterone in our body, and therefore, if I were to inject testosterone into my body as well, it doesn't really matter, does it? Well, no. Your body produces the amount of testosterone it needs at any given moment in time, given the resources that you provide it with. And anything beyond that is probably a problem because you're disrupting the way that the system is designed to function. It's the same exact thing with carbohydrates. Does that mean that testosterone is a toxin? No. But it does mean that exogenous testosterone shouldn't be conceptualized the same way as endogenous testosterone, should it? Despite the fact that they're the same molecules. It's that simple. And that's what we have to talk about with carbohydrates. I don't care whether different foods cause carbohydrates to be absorbed more quickly than others. In fact, most of the data to suggest this is noisy in and of itself, despite the fact that I still accept that conclusion. Okay? But the noise usually swamps the signal entirely when you look at the research. Just saying.
Sources of whole carbohydrates like fruit or vegetables or legumes, we consistently see.
Whole carbohydrate is a meretricious term. It's a loaded term that is designed. It's been used to adorn foods that are inappropriate for humans for years and years. It doesn't matter whether it's whole. Again, I go back to the tree outside. A tree is whole. That doesn't mean that it's appropriate to be consuming, does it? I don't care whether it's whole. It doesn't matter if it's refined either, except people are actually eating that because it's in your Twinkies and stuff. Because they use it as fiber to bulk up your food. You can go look into that as well. So,
good health effects of those foods.
No, health effect, conjugative cause, irresponsible to use. Good is even worse because it's a value judgment statement. So, Gil, you are being an irresponsible scientist. It's very unfortunate that you were doing this.
Sources of highly refined carbohydrates like soda or gummy bears or muffins, we consistently see not so good health effects.
And yet, there is no difference between the carbohydrates in those foods compared to the carbohydrates in the foods that you just listed earlier. There is a difference. The only differences are the rate at which those carbohydrates will enter the bloodstream and the absolute amount of carbohydrates in each of those foods per unit mass. In other words, the density, the carbohydrate density of those foods. That's it. Mass over volume. That's it, Gil. And so you must ask yourself, what is the thing that makes these things different from each other? Because you're saying, well, these things are associated with worse health outcomes. Could that be because of unhealthy user bias, perhaps? Is that something that might be considered to be a problem here? A confounder, a massive confounder?
Of those foods, because these foods are about much more than just the carbs that they contain. It's a whole package.
It's a whole package, including the lifestyle behavior that is exhibited by people that consume the carbohydrate foods that you just listed. That's one of many things.
Of fiber and the resistant starches and the phytonutrients and the minerals.
Fiber and resistant starch is the same thing. Fiber is an umbrella term that encompasses resistant starch.
Minerals and the vitamins in there. A lot of the
phytonutrients are nutrients from plants, and we don't require any nutrients from plants whatsoever for survival, nor should we be consuming any of them for survival. Minerals and vitamins are included in meat, things that are more species appropriate, particularly ruminant meat. Fiber is not necessary for us at all. Okay? I have not consumed fiber in 4 years, and there are no issues at all. In fact, whenever I have the occasional thing with fiber in it, which is rare, it doesn't do my gut very well, actually. Now, you might say, well, it's because you're just not adapted to it, to which I would say that's a great argument. Next time, make sure to use that whenever people are talking about the negative effects they sustain and experience initially on a keto diet.
These components are stripped away by the refinement process, and these building parts have...
No, they are not. That is some of them that are eliminated, not all of them.
A fundamental effect on how the food is processed in your body. How
correct, but you need to ask yourself the question of whether, even if it is present in whole food form, if you should be eating it in the first place.
It's absorbed and digested, and ultimately what health effect it has on you. So
Except you cannot inform upon that.
when someone
You need to look into the work of David Hume. He was an economist and a philosopher and something else as well that is also pretty different. He was a polymath, you might say. And he talks about the concept of causality from an epistemic standpoint, and he had it right. He had it right. Bang on, you might say.
that you look at one molecule, always make sure to step back and look at the whole elephant. And you can still eat a lower
Or maybe the whole forest instead of seeing only the trees and focusing on only the trees, which you still are doing, Gil, unfortunately. You've zoomed out a little bit, but there's more that you can zoom out with. Or you can zoom out more is what I should say.
carb or a lower fat diet if you prefer, if you like it that way.
Okay, so let me ask you this question, Gil. Let me just say this. I'm not going to ask you any questions, Gil. You're not here to answer the questions. We are one species. No species on the face of this planet eats different diets from its members. Every single animal has one diet for its speciation. Fact. There is very, very, very minimal variation in their dietary patterns. There must be some, because no environment is exactly the same. Every step, every foot, every yard that you go in their environment, it doesn't matter. Every meter, every mile. There's going to be some differences. Always. But they all have the same diet. They all have the same diet. In fact, when zoo animals are kept in zoos, they must be fed a specific way, or else they will get sick. Oftentimes fat. They will get fat and develop cancer. Do you know that? So we are no different. What makes you think that we're different?
If it's more sustainable for you, just don't let people tell you these fairy tales that all fat is bad for you.
Well, correct. That is a correct statement. That is an incorrect statement.
All carbs are good for you. That's nonsense. Exactly the same for fat.
Except you also have to understand that with carbohydrates, yes, there are differences in the carbs, but they're all ancestrally inconsistent, evolutionarily inconsistent for human beings.
Fats, of course, some fatty foods are good for you and some are not. Internet debates on fats confuse millions of people. It's endless because this simple concept is usually absent. It's usually not understood.
You might consider that just because a principle or a concept is simple, it doesn't mean that it is true or appropriate, and sometimes can actually indicate the exact opposite because it's a little too simple.
Saturated fat. The rivers of ink that have flown debating saturated fat. Is saturated fat good or bad for you?
Saturated fat is a fat that is present in significant amounts in the food that we are most designed genetically to tolerate across our genome, in other words, across our species. Can you eat too much saturated fat? Yes. Good luck doing it. The only way you're going to do that is by consuming things in a contraindicated way. You can consume too much of everything. You can consume too much water. You can consume too much alcohol, too many carbs. What does too much mean, though? Too much is beyond what we are designed to genetically tolerate. That is your framework. That is the blueprint to follow.
This is the wrong question entirely. Completely misses the point. Salmon, yogurt, kefir, dark chocolate, olive oil even. These are foods that contain some saturated fat, and yet we consistently see positive health effects of these foods.
No, you do not see that because effect cannot be informed upon, Gil. I don't care how many scientists use the word effect. I don't care how many medical institutions. I don't care how many scientific institutions or government institutions, etc., 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 say that it can inform upon it. Say the word effect to describe the results. I don't care. It is a fact that it cannot inform upon the effect. It is a fact that if you say effect, that is an opinion, and you must allow the general populace to decide whether that conviction is correct. You cannot say that it affects things positively. It affects your health positively. It is irresponsible to say that. I know that it's frustrating. I know that it approaches a point where you think, well, it gets to a point where eventually you're just denying science. No. It gets to a point where I am insisting upon the science so much that it looks like I'm denying the science, when paradoxically it's the other way around, and the people that are abusing science are people like you that rhetorically abuse it. You need to be responsible with your rhetoric, Gil. Shape up, because you are a scientist, and you need to be doing better. Okay? He's basically saying that on a broad level, when you see people consuming foods that have high concentrations, high percentages of saturated fat in them, like these foods that are on the screen, you consistently see that they have better health outcomes. Therefore, eat these foods. Because he's assuming that these have no negative effect. And not only is he assuming that they have no negative effect because it's clearly not interfering with their ability to live long lives and healthy lives, the people that are being studied, he's actually suggesting something even more egregious, even more transgressive, which is that these are actually contributing to the healthfulness of these people. That isn't how it works.
Butter, tallow, coconut oil in large amounts. We're not talking about eating them.
Define large amount, Gil. Have you defined large amount for us, or are you just saying words? Because large amount to me is not the same as large amount to you. You need to provide us with what you are talking about. Numbers, Gil.
Here and there, we consistently see concerning effects. So saturated.
You don't see concerning effects. You see concerning outcomes that you believe to be concerning, that probably are concerning, in a population of people that are doing completely different things that you can't control for. You see how as soon as I say that, it changes the picture? I'm talking to you as well, my dear viewer. I haven't forgotten about you. I know you're here. I know you're watching. It changes the whole picture. It sounds so certain. It sounds so strong, the statement. And then I reframe it. And then you think, what the hell? It's like the guise has been, like, the mask has just been stripped off. Like you're just like, oh, the lights have been turned on. It's like, oh, right. That's what it means.
Fat is neither good nor bad. This is cartoonish. It depends on a lot of different factors, the types of saturated fats and the package.
I would agree that it depends on the type of fat, the types of saturated fats, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The types of fats that we should be consuming are the ones that we are most genetically designed to tolerate in the foods that we are most genetically designed to tolerate, which from every inference we have is mainly from large ruminant animals. The muscle meat and the associated fat of large ruminant animals, the fat associated with large ruminant animals. We are done, Gil.
Food it comes in, so you want to look at the whole elephant. Seed oils, people losing their minds, pulling their hair out over seed oils.
Seed oils are it's one of the most perverted products that has ever been introduced into the market. They are very problematic.
They have omega-6s, they have hexane, they have double bonds. Canola oil is poison for you because it has erucic acid in it.
That is reductionist. However, what has been our exposure rate to polyunsaturated fats throughout our existence? It has been near zero, not to mention that we do absolutely know that molecules such as aldehydes are very, very cytotoxic. That is a cellular biological fact. But I'll tell you right now, you compare that biological fact with the fact that we have been consuming aldehydes for hardly any period of time whatsoever. We've actually been, the fact that we've been exposed to aldehydes in a very, 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 very small concentration in our bloodstream, with the only aldehyde really being encountered being glucose itself, but in a very, very, very small concentration, because there's only a very small concentration of glucose that exists in its linear form. You realize, okay, you combine those two facts together, and then you realize, okay, we should probably stay away from this. Polyunsaturated fats are very prone to lipid peroxidation reactions. And those break down, the lipid hydroperoxides break it down into propane, not just hexane, Gil, propane. You want propane in your cells? Again, something to consider. That's all I'm saying.
Actual health effect that we observe,
which is none.
In human beings consuming canola oil. We have a...
And what else? And doing what else? And not doing what else? Gil, this is ridiculous. In fact, you are the one being reductionist while also saying that people shouldn't be reductionist. It is the ultimate hypocrisy and lack of self-awareness that is shocking me right now.
30-minute video where we systematically went over every study. We could find dozens of studies in human beings. You see...
But again, back to the question of quantity. Does quantity imply quality?
Better blood work, lower cholesterol, triglycerides, when they change, is in a positive direction. You see less liver fat. You see lower risk of dying of heart disease.
Not risk. You don't see lower or higher risk of dying of heart disease because you can't inform upon that, Gil. You will see higher and lower incidence depending on what people are doing and what people are not doing. One of the things being canola oil, usually based on respondent data, which involves following up with people over the course of 1 to really on average 4 years. Do you really think, Gil, that any of that is able to inform strongly upon the conclusion that you are espousing right now? You tell me. And if you're watching this, send this to Gil.
Lower risk of dying of cancer.
False.
Lower mortality overall.
Who cares? I just told you what the problem is with that, Gil.
Even in people cooking with canola oil, even after you adjust for obvious
adjust for obvious confounders. Okay, so first of all, obvious confounders is not all confounders. And second of all, adjusting was done through multivariate regression, which is irresponsible control. That is not actually controlling for the study. That is you are basically, what you're doing with multivariate regression is you are basically trying to see what a result would be if you had controlled for the study because you didn't control for it. It is irresponsible. You are actually compounding and exponentially increasing errors. The proper way to control after a study is actually by making a trade-off, which was removing certain data points from the data set from people that had reported to be smoking, for example. You remove them, and then you look at the association after that, after you remove them from the data set. You don't introduce another univariate regression into the analysis and then just expand the data. Like, it's just, you have completely perverted your findings. Look into the Seventh-day Adventist study, number 2. It was the second study they did. If you compare the raw outcome data with the data that they reported after they adjusted for the data, you will find that it is literally, and I mean literally in this sense, literally backwards from what they actually observed. 100% backwards.
Founders like exercise or smoking. So I buy canola oil. I give it to my family. It's one of the main...
Okay, that's a problem. You can do what you'd like. That's a problem. And I really hope that one day you wake up from this delusion that you were living in. I really do.
Any fats that we eat. Nobody has to eat it, but...
Nobody's saying that you do.
I'm not worried because the health effects are there. Even the endless protein debates often...
Protein. I've never heard that before. Protein. I'm protein. I'm also pro-adult.
Miss this point. Should we eat 0.8 or 1.1 or 1.45 grams?
You should eat protein till satiety, frankly, so long as it's actually coming in the foods that we are designed to tolerate. Chicken breast is not one of those foods, by the way, but it more closely resembles one of those foods, I will say that. It's not just about the exact food, it's also about getting the best approximation to the constituents and composition of the food that we're most evolved to eat. It's best approximating it. So even if we didn't have access to, we don't have access to woolly mammoths anymore, right? But we can still consume the flesh of other ruminant animals that still have very similar compositions that are the best approximation to what we were consuming. So that's another detail that's important to add into this nuanced picture. So anyway, but it also depends on how it was raised and all that stuff. So
per kilo body weight, 99% of people have no idea how many grams of protein they're eating.
Correct. They also don't know how many calories they're eating. And in fact, I know how many calories they're eating. They're eating 0 because you can't consume a calorie. But that's a story for another day.
We have videos going over all those controversies, but the bottom line is most Westerners are already getting plenty of protein. They're getting all.
Wow, Gil. That is absolute nonsense. Plenty of protein according to whom, on the basis of what? Gil, I would love to schedule a conversation with you, frankly. I would love to schedule a conversation with you so we can work this out. We can work out what mistakes you're making. This is absolute nonsense that you're espousing right now, and I really, really wish that it weren't the case. I don't relish saying any of this. Are you out of your mind, Gil? That is not true in the slightest. Most people are not getting sufficient protein for their needs. You know how I know that? Because meat consumption is some of the lowest that it's ever been in recorded history. And unrecorded history, or at least differently recorded history. That is not true, Gil. Nonsense.
All the protein they need, even without counting grams of protein. There's a lot of issues with the standard Western.
How do you know that, Gil? How do you even know the answer to that question?
Diet, and lack of protein is not one of them. And these
Nonsense. Yes, it is.
endless fights, the plant protein versus the animal protein, all this UFC style battle.
Okay, it's not a UFC style battle. It's a genuine question about the bioavailability differences between the foods. Plant protein oftentimes is misconstrued with amino acids when a lot of times it's not. You're looking at proteins that are not actually able to be incorporated into tissue at all. But also, it's less of a significant problem than people will say. So we'll put that to the side. The other problem, the main problem, is that the bioavailability of plant protein is extremely low compared to animal protein. You know how we know this? Because there actually are studies that are a little more rigorous in this respect, with a very, very, very strong difference in signal that is tough to ignore. You take the nitrogen-containing catabolic byproducts that are contained in urine and fecal matter and compare that to the amount of nitrogen consumed as protein within the same time period in multiple different people. And you can assess how much of the protein was actually used. Now, there are multiple confounders here, like, did the person exercise recently? Did they just eat? How long did they go without eating? All of these things influence how much of the protein that you consume is actually used or excreted. So, in order to account for all that noise, you need a really strong signal to swamp it out. Well, how's this for you? Whenever you compare beef and egg protein through those methods to broccoli and soy protein, you find a difference in percentage of the actual absorbed amount of protein within the area of 60 to really 70%. I don't know about you. Now, granted, look, it's a relative statistic, not an absolute one, but it's not like the absolute value conversions were extremely small. So I don't know about you, but I'm going to opine that is already enough to dispense with this idea that plant protein versus animal protein, the debate doesn't matter. That's silly. Because then what happens with the protein that isn't absorbed? You excrete it. And it's a waste. So you ate for nothing, didn't you?
You watch this stuff all day long, you come away thinking that nutrition's about choosing a side, choosing a team.
Yeah, that's exactly why I created my private health science community, because we are not a tribe. Well, we are a tribe, but we're a tribe that dispenses with tribalism. We're a tribe that isn't based on tribalism. We discourage tribalism. Tribalism is a problem. It's just like science and scientism are not the same thing. Scientism is a problem. Science is great. So, same thing here. If you want to join a community of like-minded people that actually know how to think like me and not like Gil, that actually ask questions that are guided by curiosity and humility, well, again, link is in the description below to sign up for the free newsletter as well. You get access to the newsletter and the 8-question PDF, by the way. It's all there. So just an idea for you. Anyway, let's continue.
Consistently see good health effects of
No, you don't. Covered that.
Fatty fish like salmon, fermented dairy like kefir, for example,
Still no.
great health effects. Legumes
Still no.
like beans and lentils, nuts also, we see better blood
Nuts are not high in protein, Gil. Forget about bioavailability. They're not high in protein.
work, less heart disease, less inflammation on
Better blood work. According to whom, on the basis of what?
these foods, and some are from plants and some are from animals. So that doesn't explain it. When I sit down to eat, I'm not stressing out and losing sleep over the amount of protein in my diet. I know.
Okay, so you are condoning a behavior that, I mean, really what you're implying is that it's a false dichotomy. You're implying a false dichotomy. You either have to stress the hell out about what you are actually putting into your mouth, okay, and whether it's healthy or not, or you are completely insouciant, you might say, and carefree, just completely apathetic. You don't care. I mean, that's what the implication is to me. That's what my perception of this is.
I eat a diverse diet that includes
Diversity is not something that is actually indicated for really any species whatsoever. No animal consumes a diverse diet. Fact check me on it. Now, there's always an exception to the rule, like sometimes a few, like there might be like a 1% exception, to be fair. But I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't. Every animal is a specialist in terms of diet, also in terms of behavior, in fact. But we won't get into that conversation today.
number of protein-rich sources, and they're health promoting. That's the main thing for
Health promoting is a cause and effect statement, Gil. No.
me. Even fiber, which the evidence for health benefits of fiber
Is zero. There is no scientific evidence for the efficacy of fiber whatsoever. Fiber is something that we don't even have the ability to digest. Now, last I checked, if you can't digest something, the chances are you probably shouldn't be consuming it. You know how long it took, you know how much propaganda it takes to get people to believe that fiber is good, something that you can't digest is good for you, and that's something that you should be consuming? You know how much propaganda has to be fed to people for them to believe that? Nonsense, Gil. Fiber is actually destructive to the interior nervous system over time. It's pernicious and insidious in nature, it seems. Anthropologically, physiologically, anatomically, we are not designed to consume fiber or any significant amount of plant material whatsoever. This isn't some conspiratorial nonsense, okay? I'm actually not a fan of conspiratorial thinking. Conspiratorial thinking rejects science. Conspiratorial thinking believes that basically everyone is guilty until proven innocent. And actually, until never proven innocent. You're never proven innocent. Any evidence against a conspiracy is used to justify and build up the conspiracy even greater. It's like a hydra almost. You cut off one of the heads and then two of them grow back. It just gets bigger the more you debunk it. This is the problem with conspiratorial thinking. The only way to kill a hydra is basically just by, well, okay, the analogy kind of falls apart here. Never mind. I was going to say to ignore it, but actually, no. That's not how that works. Anyway. So yeah, no, this isn't conspiratorial nonsense. This isn't like reactionary health, whatever. This is, what's actually happening is that this is an exchange of someone, me, that actually is insisting upon science, and someone else that says that they're a scientist that is representing not science. They're representing scientism and, well, I mean, not really scientism, but irresponsible rhetoric surrounding science.
It is one of the strongest evidence bases in nutrition.
No, it isn't.
We see less heart disease, less cancer.
What is the mechanism behind higher fiber intake and lower incidence of heart disease? See, this is the problem. You just provided me a perfect example of how what you're talking about, the model by which you were looking at health through, is nonsensical. What is the mechanism, Gil? How would fiber reduce the risk of heart disease?
Cancer, less diabetes.
Less cancer. How does it work that way? How does that work? That's even less sensible.
But really, it's the food.
Diabetes, I suppose, is the only one that makes sense because fiber will blunt a glucose spike.
The fiber comes in, that natural package, right? That's what we're talking about.
Natural package, like that natural package of cyanide in your almonds, right? We didn't put that in there. The plant did. Do you know that? Why is it the case that all of the poisons we create are coming from plants, by the way? You ever thought about that?
It's the health effect of those foods, not necessarily the effect of
Which you can't inform upon.
any food with fiber. Because if we forget this whole elephant concept, then we get gamed by the food industry.
You keep telling us about this elephant concept, which in other words is reductionism, and yet you keep making the same mistake by assuming that things are causally related whenever there are multiple confounders involved. That is itself reductionism, actually. It's a different form of it. It's a different manifestation and presentation of it, but it's exactly what it is.
Selling us their sugary foods, saying, hey, it contains fiber.
But I thought sugar was good.
We threw fiber in there. All of this principle,
Depending on the food it comes in.
doesn't mean that nutrients don't matter, right? That humongous article I wrote goes over.
Doesn't matter how big the article is, it matters the veracity of the article, which I am going to suspect is suboptimal, to say the least.
Dozens of nutrients one by one and best sources and how to make sure you're getting enough. But the bottom line is, at the end of the day, don't forget, step back, look at the whole elephant. The beautiful
Right back at you, Gil.
thing is how simple this principle is, how easy
It doesn't matter how simple it is. It matters whether it's true and based in reality.
to grasp. You don't need to be a scientist. And it's so
Well, I'm not. And also, you're implying that... Never mind.
powerful. We constantly hear from viewers saying how they reverse diseases and maintain fantastic blood work, and they have
You can reverse diseases by doing many different things that aren't indicated for your physiology. You can actually reverse diabetes by starving yourself. Do you know that, Gil? Doesn't mean you should starve yourself. You can, hey, you know what? You can decrease your body weight by cutting your legs off. Does that mean you should cut your legs off, man?
peace of mind eating, and they don't get swept away by the fear mongering on social media anymore.
Well, that's great. That's great. But the problem is implying that what I'm doing, for example, is fear mongering. When I'm not fear mongering, we don't encourage fear. We encourage living intentionally. When I avoid doing something that I shouldn't be doing, I'm not doing it out of fear. If I'm doing it out of fear, then it's the wrong reason why I'm avoiding it. You have to avoid it because you are intentionally, fear is never a good thing, really. This is the interesting thing about us as human beings. We have the ability to sublimate our fear into something greater. Fear is not the most optimal thing because it's not rational. Fear isn't rational. So I'm not telling you to be afraid of carbohydrates and fiber. I'm telling you to intentionally avoid them because you understand that that your body is worth something, that your body is valuable, and you ought to treat it like it is something to value. Does that make sense? I think it makes sense.
I remember one viewer who messaged me, I'll never forget that. She was terrified of her lunch. She was literally petrified of every food because one influencer told her carbs are poison. The other said fats are bad for you. The other said dairy is toxic. The other said oils are a no-no. She had nothing left. She just started going through some of our simple videos explaining these concepts. She instantly understood that these are imaginary monsters. This is made up stuff. And
No, it's not all made up. Some of it's made up. And also, you know what? I'm going to tell you something. I feel for these people because I dealt with similar things. I think we all sort of had times of orthorexia. I don't know. A lot of it actually has to do with the person viewing it, not the people saying it. There is mutual fault. A lot of people are hypersensitive to things and they look way too deep into things. They think way too deep into things and they just let it consume them. It's not to say the things they were being exposed to that made them that way were right. But you're going to be exposed to those things. And it doesn't mean that every single one of the things that are being said is false, just because it made you scared. I mean, this philosophy is actually dangerous in and of itself. Just moderate every single thing, no matter what. Moderation is a virtue. It's like, oh, moderation of things that you ought not to be doing? That's a virtue? Interesting. Now, I think moderation is a virtue about things that are either neutral to be doing or things that are good to be doing. In which case, actually, moderation isn't indicated. It's indicated to just do the thing all the time if it's a good thing. Why would you moderate that? This is the problem. This is an Aristotelian notion, which is like moderation is a virtue, or it was either Thomas Aquinas or it was Aristotle or both that said something like this. Moderation is not a virtue. No, it isn't. It doesn't make any sense. How would it be a virtue? If something is good, you do it regularly. Unless you need a break or something. Because it's like really arduous or onerous or something like that. It shouldn't be onerous, it'd be arduous. If something's bad, you don't ever do it. Done. It's really that simple.
Started to relax and enjoy her food and eating a healthy diet without being in constant panic.
So you say healthy diet and then you show plant slop on the screen. I'm sorry, Gil. That's not that is sending the wrong message.
Okay, just with this first principle, you're already
the first wrong principle.
Way harder to fool than almost everybody on the internet. But
except you were being fooled by this charlatan. No, you're not, though. You're not.
But this next principle trips up a lot of smart people. Second fundamental principle. Some people have specific conditions and specific intolerances, and they need to personalize their diet. That doesn't necessarily apply to all of humanity.
That is true. It is far rarer than you are going to let on, however. See, this is one of the things that people say in order to basically avoid responsibility for promoting the wrong dietary and health behaviors, lifestyle behaviors. This is what happens. When they realize that their diets are actually having negative effects on people, they're clearly sensitive to all of these plant toxins that we're not evolved to tolerate. They're clearly intolerant to carbohydrates. They have mood swings and all this stuff. Instead of saying, oh, well, that's because we're feeding them the wrong diet, they say, this person's just different. It's the way that they exonerate themselves. Exculpate themselves from their erroneous nonsense. Some people, yes, are more sensitive than others because we all have genetic differences that make us more susceptible, less susceptible to certain things, more symptomatic, less symptomatic, et cetera, et cetera. Some of us are more resilient to those things. Michaela Peterson is someone that clearly is on the lower end of that spectrum. She's very susceptible to these things. She's very sensitive to these things. That doesn't mean that the people that aren't as susceptible aren't immediately symptomatic, or at least consciously symptomatic, therefore are totally, I don't know, that the diet you're recommending is totally benign and innocuous to them. It's not how that works. It's just not.
Blown away by how much fear-mongering and confusion on social media depends on you not understanding this. Some people are intolerant to gluten that are legit.
This is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Gluten is a plant toxin. Some people are more susceptible to the effects of toxins than the other, even at the same dose. That does not mean that in the person that is less susceptible and less symptomatic, they should continue eating the gluten. Gil. I have a friend who has quote-unquote gluten intolerance. If he eats any gluten, he will start throwing up. It's bad. He's really sensitive to it. That doesn't mean that that doesn't have that reaction, that don't have the reaction, should eat gluten.
Conditions like celiac and others. We have videos covering that, how to diagnose and how to navigate that for people who have those conditions. But that doesn't apply to 99% of humans. Some people.
Gil, I'm going to ask you again. I'm going to ask this question again to you, my dear viewer, I am here still. I know you're here. Does any species operate this way? Does any species need a specialized diet for it because, it's just sensitive to certain things that it eats in its diet? Is that how that works? I understand that we live in a modern context, but what relevance does that have? What relevant factor within our modern context causes us to have to do this, to personalize an entirely different diet?
Form kidney stones, and a subset of those form kidney stones made up of oxalates. For those,
Not a subset. It's basically all of them. They're calcium oxalate stones, usually.
those individuals, there are very specific strategies. We've covered all those before, but this does.
You might ask yourself why these stones develop in the first place. Is it because you're consuming too much calcium? Or is it because you're consuming too many oxalates? Oxalates, since Gil isn't covering it right now or hasn't covered it, he probably will whenever I unpause this. Hopefully. Maybe I'm being too charitable. Are plant toxins. They're one of the most ubiquitous plant toxins in the plant kingdom. They form crystals in your body with minerals, after binding with minerals like calcium and zinc and magnesium. And they destroy cells. They destroy cells on impact. They destroy them. The way in which the body excretes oxalates is through the kidneys. The problem, though, is that those can build up. And eventually they can create kidney stones. So there we go. Now, what's the requirement for consuming oxalates in the human diet? Well, it's 0. And I'm not saying that just because something isn't required, that means that you shouldn't be consuming them, but then you have to ask ourselves the question that we keep going back to, which is how long have our genes evolved to withstand the consumption of a significant amount, or any amount really, of oxalates regularly throughout our lives in each individual within our species, every generation after generation after generation? What was that level? What was the exposure level? Was it sufficient enough and recent enough to have caused full genotypic adaptations to our genome to thus mean that we should be consuming them on a regular basis? What do you think? No.
Doesn't apply to the vast majority of humans.
Why not? Because they just don't develop oxalates? Okay, so basically, next time that I see that someone's smoking and they're not developing any lung problems that I can see, any symptoms, I'm going to tell them to keep smoking. How do you feel about that, Gil?
Do you know how much I worry about oxalates when I sit down to eat?
You don't at all, because you don't understand human physiology and you don't understand evolutionary biology, Gil. Nonsensical. Nonsensical nonsense.
0. Never.
Well, congratulations, Gil. It's like watching people. You know how much I worry about my lungs whenever I smoke? 0. It's like, well, we're not telling you to worry. We're telling you to live intentionally, right? I'm not saying that oxalates are as dangerous as smoking. That would be stupid. Don't misread what I'm saying, please. For your own sake. Not please for me. I don't care. You can do what you want, but I trust you. You're not going to do that. Unless you're a hater. Are you a hater? I would say to dislike the video, but YouTube has had a change of plans. They've now removed the dislike button on like everything. What the hell is that about? I want people to dislike my video if they don't like it. Tell me.
Never think about them, because I'm not a stone former. In my family, we're not stone formers. So that's one thing we.
Because it doesn't run in my family. Give me a break. That's his defense. This is a scientist.
don't need to worry about. Here's a beet salad with walnuts and greens I had the other day. Did I measure the oxalates in this? Didn't think about it once, just enjoyed it. Some people have.
That's a problem. I did an oxalate countdown list. Yeah, go check that out. Go check that out. In my videos tab, you'll see it.
Of GI conditions, IBS, irritable bowel, or IBD, inflammatory bowel. Those people need to personalize their strategies for that.
Oh, so basically what he's saying is only until you actually develop serious conditions do you need to have a personalized diet. So don't do the prevention method. Just do the palliative sort of like, the alteration method after you've developed the problem. Wait until you go off the edge, and then you parachute. Then you activate your parachute. Instead of walking away from the ledge in the first place, so you don't have to worry about that, and perhaps the parachute not working, for example. No, you just fall off the edge.
A lot of those intolerances can sometimes be reversed. But the point is, those
can sometimes be reversed. All of them can be reversed, Gil. All of them. All of those are manifestations of disease as a result of deviating too strongly and too starkly away from what the body is designed to withstand genetically. That is how evolutionary biology works. If you are eating something you were not designed to eat for long periods of time, in some people for shorter periods of time, you will develop problems. Those problems can manifest in many different ways because of genetic variation. Psoriasis, so skin issues, serious acne and acne scarring, and psoriasis and eczema and endometriosis. Or you can have serious digestive problems, Crohn's disease, IBS, inflammatory bowel syndrome, all those things. Diverticulosis, diverticulitis. Or you can have diabetes. Or you can have heart disease. Or you can have multiple combinations of these things. Or you can have sarcopenia. Or you can, you have so many different things that you can develop. They're all the result of deviating away from what you're designed to tolerate. Particularly if it's an extremely stark one, but it doesn't have to be an extremely stark one. I have a whole video about this called Modern Life is an Experiment. Check that out, because I cover all the nuance behind that. I'm sitting in front of artificial blue light in front of a camera with a computer in front of me and a monitor and a microphone and et cetera, et cetera. That's not ancestrally consistent either. Where do you draw the line, Eddie? Well, that's a great question. Go check out that video because I cover all those nuances there. We have to be a little more intentional with this stuff, is my main point.
limitations and personalizations don't apply to a healthy individual.
Wow, what?
Other things that also vary a lot.
Limitations don't apply to healthy individuals because, well, they don't have any symptoms, so therefore we're just going to let them be. Sometimes that rule is fine, especially whenever they are eating. It's particularly within the context of them doing what they're designed to do from every inference we have already. Because then if there's no symptoms, no, you're obligated to not intervene in those circumstances. It's the Hippocratic Oath, right? But whenever they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, I mean, you wouldn't say that just because someone has no symptoms whenever they smoke and drink all the time, that it's okay to be smoking and drinking all the time. And if you were to say that, I would highly suggest reevaluating your standards for appropriate behavior.
Person to person and cause a lot of confusion. Eggs. Do eggs raise your cholesterol or not?
Begging the question fallacy. That is based on a premise that needs to be questioned. Is raising your cholesterol a problem in the first place? No, it isn't. Also, even that question needs to be broken apart. Risen in any context, at any level? Huh. Yeah, anyway, the main thing here is to cover the fact that cholesterol is not a problem. Cholesterol doesn't even influence your likelihood, so to speak, quote unquote, your risk, your likelihood of developing heart disease. The mechanisms don't even make sense. The thing that causes heart disease is damage to the arteries, and cholesterol ends up in those areas because they're involved in the cellular repair process whenever they're carried by LDL. We are done.
People can't get a straight answer. That's because there is no one answer. Some people...
Oh gosh, Gil, it's all based on the wrong frame. The ultimate irony here is that in the beginning of the video, he said, people are asking the wrong questions. And also people are being reductionist. And he has proceeded to literally be exactly those things throughout this entire video, more than anything else, actually. He's wanting to sound reasonable. He's not being reasonable.
When they eat cholesterol in their diet like eggs, their blood cholesterol level skyrockets. But for most people that...
So you are admitting then that different populations respond differently to different dietary behaviors depending on underlying context. which he seemed to fail to understand or at least acknowledge implicitly and explicitly earlier in the video.
That's not seen. Most people, they see a modest increase of about 7 points in your cholesterol level. So it makes sense to personalize for your biology, for your needs. Some people are very salt sensitive. They eat more sodium and their blood pressure goes through the roof. Others are more.
Could that be in populations that have higher resting and fasting insulin? Or, alternatively, are consuming salt with things that stimulate insulin significantly, which means that every time that they consume the salt, their blood pressure goes up. Insulin being responsible for influencing sodium excretion rate. Influencing it. What's the word? I have not had words escape me this entire video. Now I have. It has an antagonistic effect. Antagonistically, that's what I mean. There we go.
Salt tolerant varies a lot. So personalize. Eat to your blood work.
Personalize. Why don't you go ahead and actually, this is one of those rare circumstances where you should be looking at statistics and also physiology to connect the dots here.
Eat to your test. Just a great mindset. Blood sugar spikes, the glucose spikes. People are pulling their hair out over the spikes.
Yes, because whenever you spike your glucose, the glucose damages the endothelial lining. And it is harmful. Yeah.
Some individuals have health conditions where their glucose response to a meal is not normal. Typical example.
What do you mean not normal? That also puts into question whether the normal response is actually a good thing. Because the normal glucose response is a spike in most people, because normal is just what most people do and what is observed normally. It doesn't mean indicated or appropriate for our physiology at all, does it?
With someone with diabetes. We have a whole video explaining strategies for those individuals. But
okay, so based on A1C values, which contextually they're contextually dependent, because A1C values can actually go up on carnivore despite the fact that glycation rate can go down. Which seems paradoxical until you realize that the HbA1c value depends on context. Not only does it measure the glycation rate on average over the course of 2 to 4 months of your red blood cells, it also is dependent on the length of the lifespan of the red blood cells, which tends to go up on carnivore, inferred most strongly from the fact that any carnivores that actually have been studied for a significant amount of time have a reticulocyte production rate that goes down markedly.
this does not apply to healthy people. How come we have millions of people terrified of glucose spikes, of oxalates, of gluten?
They're not terrified, and if they are terrified, that's a problem. You are implying that we must be terrifying them because we are advising that they do not exhibit those things, which is not how logic works. That's not how this works, Gil.
And then the most knowledgeable people on earth on these topics that I talk to all the time, that study this for a living, they're not worried about it. They just sit down.
Who cares? You do realize, Gil, that the scientific community has made mistakes before. Science changes. Oh, they don't worry about it. They don't worry whenever they lobotomize people, and especially women. They don't worry about it at all. They just do it. So why are we even talking about this? Well, that's different, Eddie. It's just such a vapid response, isn't it? An unsophisticated, just lazy response. That's different. Yeah, how is it different? You can't just say, that's different. That's different, though. Like, in what relevant way is it different? Okay? Every analogy is different from the actual thing. Every comparison is different.
And enjoy their food. I got my PhD for work on aging and nutrition. I've read.
Who cares? There are many people that have acquired their PhD that do not deserve it. There are many people that have acquired their PhD that think I should get my PhD. So what the hell are you talking about, Gil? Thomas Seyfried, professor at Boston College, Boston University. I interviewed him a few weeks ago. He said exactly that. Now, I have my disagreements with him, actually. I don't even want to enter that field at all. The only reason that I ever would be to actually perform research, because it's the only way that I can actually do that. And so I might do it, but I wouldn't talk about it. I'll tell you that much. I might mention it casually. Oh, yeah, I have my PhD. See how it means nothing? Really? Like, that's how it would go. I know this more than you do, Gil. Obviously. Which is sad.
Thousands, literally thousands of studies on nutrition. When I say
who cares? I don't care if it's millions. I don't care if it's trillions, Gil. The limitations do not apply to small quantities only.
Sit down to eat with my family, we're not stressing out over oxalates.
Who is telling you to stress out about it, Gil? You are making a straw man argument in order to make your argument be more appealing to people. To make your argument more appealing to people, because you are pretending like you are the person that is cool, calm, and collected, while all of the other people are screaming their tits off, so to speak, about oxalates or something. Living intentionally is not the same thing as living fearfully. In fact, the person that I heard this from first, ironically, I thought it was a great way of putting it, was Paul Saladino years ago. It was in 2022. And I thought it was a very eloquent way of putting it, despite the fact that Paul doesn't know what he's talking about either. Unfortunately.
Or glucose spikes. We're just enjoying food. A lot.
Oh, yeah. You don't have to worry about literally anything. You don't have to worry about all the cyanide in your almonds and all the glucose spikes, all the high blood sugar. I'm just eating my food. Oh, you don't need to worry about that. The Oreos and the ultra processed nature of all of your Oreo milkshake and the cookies and cream milkshake and your fries and your oil soaked pizza with glyphosate laden. Oh, it doesn't matter. I'm just sitting there enjoying my food. You just got to enjoy things, man. That's what you got to do. You just have to enjoy it. Of course, this isn't to mention the fact that you can also enjoy things that aren't like this either. You can enjoy actually having good health, and you can still enjoy it. You can enjoy the taste of meat and eggs and also species appropriate, foods and all that stuff. You can still enjoy that, but you can also enjoy sugar and Twinkies and ding dongs. So you might as well just go ahead and do that and not worry about your glucose spike because, well, I'm a scientist and I have been for 30 years.
A lot of fear mongering out there relies
Again with the fear mongering.
On you not understanding these basic principles. And
these basic principles, first of all, you've listed two of them, and second, in 15 minutes, and second of all, the principles are stupid, Gil. They aren't based in reality. I wish this weren't true. You've probably recognized in the last 2 hours, I have progressively gotten more and more frustrated with this rhetoric. And it's because I think it's more frustrating because I'm not able to talk to him. I think that's always been like, it's like, kidding. I am not a sadist. I am morally grounded. But anyway, it's because it's so like you pretended like you had the answers and then you just completely, you demonstrated complete lack of answers. Like it's not, no.
Fearing things that don't apply to you. Why? Because fear.
What makes you think it doesn't apply to us, Gil? Are we human beings? Are we members of the same species? Nowadays in 2026, we have arguments online about how actually we're not, and different races are different species because people are moronic. I know it's contentious nowadays to say that we are all members of the same species, but we are, in fact, members of the same species. Irrespective of melanin content. So, therefore, we all have the same diet. With very minimal variation. Like, very minimal, okay? I'm not saying there aren't genetic differences based on racial categories, by the way. I'm not saying that. There are. You know what's one of the ironic things, by the way? You want to know one of these that's ironic. And I sort of knew it, but I didn't know it as deeply as I know it now after someone was telling me more about it. It is said that people in African populations, or at least people with more African descent based on their skin color, so black people, browner people, you know what I mean. They must be more adapted to having carbohydrates because they lived in tropical environments and they had more availability of carbohydrates than people in Arctic climates and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, interesting. So if that were the case, why is it the case that in every single area where there are like Australian Aboriginals, for example, and then the wider Australians, in other countries where you have people that are darker and then you have people that are lighter, why are the ones that are in the darker populations having a higher per capita presentation of diabetes? Now, there are multiple factors, just like there are with every analysis statistically, because we're basically making a statistical assertion here. One of these would be one of the things that is one of these objections is socioeconomic status. The problem is when you actually take a look at just people with lower socioeconomic status, per capita, it's still greater in those people. It's almost as if those people that have higher melanin content had less time to adapt to the advent of agriculture than people that lived in Arctic climates, evolutionarily, anthropologically speaking. In fact, white people, lighter people, seem to be more adapted anthropologically to carbohydrate content, despite the fact that we also shouldn't be consuming any. So if anything, it's the opposite. Just a thought.
Is a very powerful trigger to get you to click stuff and swipe your credit card. Okay,
it's all a grift. It's all a grift. You got that? Whenever people talk about evolutionary history and all that, it's all a grift, right? Am I grifting? What does it mean to grift? Why don't we ask ourselves that question? Goodness me. You know, I'll tell you what the ultimate grift is. The ultimate grift is going to university and becoming a researcher because you think it's going to be something enlightening. And you're going to learn a lot. You're going to be Gil Carvalho instead, actually. Womp womp. Get out, Gil.
Glucose spikes, panic, and stampede also misses another fundamental principle of biology.
Tell us all about biology, Gil Carvalho, because I'll tell you right now, I know more about that than you do as well. Fact. Little factoid for ya.
And nutrition. And this is our third principle that we're going to cover. This
The third one. Okay, I thought there were 5.
Confuses so many people, including smart people, and it's so simple.
Tell us all about what confuses smart people, Gil.
Your body is in constant motion, constant changes. We call it homeostasis. During exercise, your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up. After you eat something with fat in it, those fats go into the bloodstream, your triglycerides go up.
Not necessarily, Gil. You see how you just conflated that? Because triglycerides go up whenever insulin goes up. They especially go up when you consume fat with carbohydrates because now you've stimulated insulin significantly, plus you've also consumed fat. That's whenever your triglycerides go up. What actually goes up is chylomicrons, usually. Then VLDL can increase. But usually, once again, that's whenever those are in typical contexts. And then IDL and then LDL. That's physiology. You are not considering the I to G ratio. So again, whenever I told you that I know more about biology than you, I actually meant it. You should have said triglycerides can go up. Because they can, if you're eating an inappropriate diet or an inappropriate meal. It's inappropriate when it's especially regular. If you want to be like really ancestrally consistent, I suppose once in a great while, you had like a hive of honey that you would like maybe consume. Like once in a great while, you would have honey. Like I'm not denying that, but you also have to consider the fact that we do live in a modern context. And if the option is to live 100% dietarily consistent or 95% in order to prevent addiction because we live in a time of abundance, you might suggest or you might decide that the 95% route is actually better. So it just depends on what the 95% is actually made up of. It doesn't go against what I'm talking about with evolutionary consistency because once again, if you watch the Modern Diet as an Experiment video, you'll understand that it's completely consistent. As a general rule, I talk about what we're designed, again, I called it the blueprint earlier. That's the point. What we're designed to withstand or genetically tolerate. That's the blueprint. There can be some slight tweaks here and there depending on modern context, and that's when it gets into that. But it would take forever to talk about all those nuances, and so I'm not going to right now.
You eat something with carbohydrate, those sugars go into your bloodstream, your blood sugar goes up. These are examples of temporary changes. We call them acute changes. This is not
Acute. Equilateral. Obtuse.
disease. It's not the same as disease. The problem is continuous exposure to these issues, what we call chronic exposure. Your blood
What is the approach that's most conducive to getting you addicted to having high blood sugar responses all the time? Maybe having the one to begin with?
pressure is high all the time. You're sitting down and your blood pressure is through the roof. That's hypertension. That's a
Yeah, okay, great. Cool. I agree, Gil. I agree. Yay! Oh, that's great. We agree.
problem. Your triglycerides are high all the time. Even when you're fasted, your blood sugar is high.
Nah, see the problem there? I thought we talked about context, Gil. I thought you were talking about context. Triglycerides, whenever you were initially losing lots of fat and fasting, can actually go up. Because did you know that the triglyceride test does not measure triglycerides? It measures free glycerol. Womp womp. Yeah, okay. Problem, because guess what? You know what happens whenever you break down your stored fat? You break it down into individual fatty acids, non-esterified fatty acids, NEFA, and you also break them down into free glycerol molecules. Well, what happens whenever that stuff is broken down in excess, more than what you actually need at that time? Well, you can get reesterification into triglycerides of the glycerol and individual fatty acids into triglycerides, and then they can be stored again. It's an interesting thing that happens in the body. A lot of times the body, whenever it enters a catabolic state, can break down more fat than it actually needs at that time. And so whenever that happens, it says, okay, well, we don't need this anymore. Or we don't need this at all. We realize that. So now we're going to reesterify and put them back into the adipose tissue. So there you go.
High even when you're fasted.
Blood sugar can also go up. I thought we talked about context, Gil. Blood sugar's high even when you're fasted. Interesting. Well, you know, on carnivore, you can actually have a higher fasting blood glucose level while also exhibiting a lower glycation rate. I said that about HbA1c. Well, the same thing is true for fasting blood glucose, and there's multiple reasons for this. Insulin is low. Also, there's a Randle cycle effect at play, where when your cells are using lots of fat, there's less glucose that's able to go into them for aerobic use, so to speak. Glucose isn't aerobically used. It's the subsequent pyruvate that's used aerobically, but still. Yeah, there you get that phenomenon, and then the glucose level can sort of go up as a result of that. So 95 milligrams per deciliter, 90 milligrams per deciliter, sometimes up to 100 grams per deciliter, milligrams per deciliter. Oh my gosh, grams per deciliter. Dead. Dead. Okay. But anyway, so I thought context matters, right? Guess not.
That's an issue. Don't fall
Not necessarily.
for this switcheroo, for this cheap trick.
He stole the words right out of my mouth. He's talking about 5 principles. Once again, I'm going to remind you in a friendly fashion, in a friendly manner. If you want the 8 questions, just to start you out on acquiring this clarity and being able to decode health claims, get the health claim decoder. Link is in the description below. It is free. First name, email, done. It also includes the free newsletter. If you don't want that, fine. I would ask you why, but fine. Unsubscribe at any time. Done. But you get it for free instantly once you confirm.
A blood test going up after an activity or during an activity is not the same as that blood value being high all the time in the
Correct. Yay.
context of a disease. Fourth principle of nutrition. This explains so much. You grasp this. A lot of the dilemmas just...
Well, I hope this explains a lot more than what's been explained here because, I hope it explains something different because what you've now explained is that what you've explained up to this point is that you don't understand health and logic. So let's go to this fourth principle and hope that this is a redeeming one.
Fade away. Compared to what? Everything in nutrition is instead of what?
Right. That is actually but that's probably his best principle because I always say that. That's in my health claim decoder. Compared to what? High compared to what? Low compared to what?
Stop thinking of foods as good and bad.
Oh boy. Now he's applying it in the worst possible way. What, did we expect anything different? Did we really expect anything different? This is what losers do. I'm not kidding. I'm serious. I mean this in the most loving way possible to anyone that is making this mistake that I don't have any problems with. I really do mean this. This is what losers do. They make a bad decision and they go, well, it's better than this though. Well, at least it's better than this. So you'll very quickly realize that you can say that about any behavior. Oh, I murdered someone, but at least I didn't do a mass murder. Oh man, that would have been really bad. That's what losers do. What losers do is they compare themselves to someone that is below themselves so that they can feel good about their current behaviors. What winners do is they say, all right, I'm making peace with what I've just done because I am a mature adult and doing anything else would be counterproductive to being better and improving myself. However, I know that I can do better and I know that I should be better. How can I be better and how can I strive to be better every single day? Compare myself to someone that isn't starkly greater than me. I mean, have that as an ideal, obviously. But incrementally make reasonable goals and reasonable efforts to achieve those goals. Make peace with yourself whenever you fail. Don't beat yourself up, but never sit there and say, at least I didn't. No. If you're going to say that, you need to, in the same breath, say, but that's not acceptable. I don't accept that behavior because self-talk means a lot. It means a lot. It has an unconscious effect on your mentality. This is psychology.
Superfoods and poison. That's not how this works.
Correct. However, there's a very, very simple dichotomy here, and it's indicated or contraindicated. Ah! That is appropriate.
And that type of mindset makes you an easy target because any food.
Sure. You know what? I think my brain is fried. I'm starting to get fatigued mentally. I'm just going to move forward with this.
Can be made to look good or bad depending what you compare it to.
That's true.
Make ice cream or bacon or anything look good by controlling what I'm comparing it to. The saturated fat debates confuse people with this all the time.
Let's see if he gets this right.
I found a study where more or less saturated fat doesn't make a difference. So it's
whoever's saying that doesn't know science.
All a wash. Compared to what? Large studies have shown this many times. We've known this for many years. You compare butter to white bread or muffins, you don't see much of a difference in terms of heart disease.
Who cares, Gil?
Compare butter to olive oil. You see less heart disease. Or
Oh my gosh. Healthy user bias. And also, what was the difference in absolute terms between those groups? Don't give me a relative difference, give me an absolute difference, and then let's talk. Because if your absolute difference is in the tenths or hundredths of thousandths of incidents per person per year of follow-up, we're going to have a problem.
to brown rice or to steel cut oats. There you see the difference.
Oh, you see the difference because it always makes a difference because butter bad, okay? Butter bad. Don't have too much butter.
Fifth principle of nutrition, and this probably gives
Great. 5 principles. We're now at the 5th one. So all of them have sucked except the 4th one, but he misrepresented it and misapplied it. So, okay, what's the 5th one?
people the most peace of mind. It is so liberating. Your health is determined by the foods you eat consistently, not something you do occasionally.
Okay, yes, but now you're encouraging people to dabble in drugs. Okay, I'm sorry. Let's just call it for what it is. I'm not sorry, actually. Why the hell did I say that? Again, self-talk means something. I'm not sorry, literally at all, in the slightest, for saying that. I'm sorry that you're wrong. I'm sorry that this is something that I have to say to you, and that I should say to you, and that I am going to say to you. Sorry that you have to hear it, perhaps. But that is not appropriate. You don't encourage people to continue dabbling in their addiction. It doesn't mean that I am literally the most perfect person ever. I had a video that I made a while back. It was a live stream. It was back in January, I think, of this year, where I said, fell off the diet. And it was a particularly bad day, which is why I actually made the video. I usually never have those. Like, it was rare. My mom made chicken pot pie, and I felt like garbage after eating it. Do you know that? I felt like garbage. I had one slice. That's what I consider heavily falling off the diet, by the way. But it doesn't mean that I went up on there and I went, yeah, but it's okay though. Every once in a while, am I right? No, what I did is I said, nope, that was not optimal. I'm glad that my body is resilient enough to the point where I can recover very, very reflexively from this. Okay, I'm very glad that this is what it really means for me to fall off badly. Like, look, I can appreciate where I am compared to where other people are below me. That's great. But I'm not going to use that to justify that decision, because that is a recipe for disaster and failure. You don't contribute to people's addictions by saying, oh, well, it's okay. Having it once in a while is great. Eat your ice cream. Eat your ice cream. Let me have some of that, by the way. That's not what you do you?
So it's not about being perfect. It's about most of your diet being healthy foods. I went to a family picnic
But you don't know what healthy means.
last week, and I had a bunch of potato chips.
Why? Why did you decide to do that? Why? By the way, I wouldn't have even done that because I don't even like them. I'm the sweets guy. I'm the jelly-filled donut guy. That's what I am.
Am I worried about that? Not really, because I do that once in a blue moon, and 99% of
I mean, it's great if you're able to moderate, by the way. That is much better than being of the very addictive type, like the binge type, is what I should say. I'm not pretending otherwise, but there's a slight difference in framing that we need to recognize here.
my foods in my diet are really healthy. Have the ice cream on the weekend with your kids. Have the
No, no, Gil, you imbecile. What does that tell you unconsciously? What are you unconsciously telling yourself whenever you do that? You are telling yourself that it is okay to poison yourself occasionally. That's what you're saying. And if you disagree and you say, no, you're just telling yourself that you can have a break from perfection. It's like, if I walk around and what's a good example? What's a good analogy? I don't even know if I need an analogy for this. Like, what do you, you're saying that you're literally telling yourself that you need a break from doing the right thing. That's what you're telling yourself. You're saying, I need a break from doing the right thing. You're telling yourself that. You're telling yourself, well, what I'm doing is onerous. It's really, really, really hard. and I need a break. That's what you're telling yourself. You're telling yourself that you can't handle it. So not only are you saying to make peace with yourself, because that would actually be something that I agree with. Make peace with yourself. I don't care if you fall off the wagon a million times. You make peace with yourself, you make peace with the decision, and then you do better. Even you either do better or you die trying, okay? But you're actually encouraging people to do this. You're encouraging people that may not be doing this right now to do this. Are you out of your mind, Gil?
Piece of candy once in a while. The problem is eating that stuff day in and day out.
What is the method conducive to doing so? Perhaps having it occasionally and saying it's okay? Talk to Courtney Luna about this, because she's someone that knows how this works.
The real currency of nutrition is dietary pattern, more so than isolated foods. And the diet we have the
Horrible motto, by the way.
most evidence for is something
You don't have any evidence for it. You don't even know what constitutes evidence.
called traditional Mediterranean diet. We see
Oh my gosh. A construct, something that doesn't even exist, that was invented by scientists based on individual foods that were measured, or not even measured, but considered in certain analyses in the Mediterranean region. All over the Mediterranean region.
less heart disease, less diabetes, less of some types of cancer, less mortality, even better mental health.
I think I already covered this. Again, my brain is getting fried from this. Like, I am exerting myself way too much.
What is the traditional Mediterranean diet? It's basically fruits and vegetables, legumes, whole grains, olive oil, fish.
No, it isn't. This is the Mediterranean diet that was constructed. It was constructed by scientists. It's not actually what's eaten broadly across the Mediterranean region. That's not how it works. There are multiple different diets that are eaten across the Mediterranean region. Multiple. This is a scientific construct based on noisy data that doesn't mean anything.
Seafood, some dairy, lean meats, and low in ultra processed junk foods. So basically all the foods and principles we already covered, right? It all comes full circle. This is a general reference. It's not a strict menu. It's not shackles. You can and you should personalize it. If you don't like one of those foods, don't eat it. If you have an intolerance, take it out. If you want to eat a low carb or low fat or a vegetarian version, you can do that. Once you understand, it's not about the name of the diet, it's about the fundamental principles that we covered. Then you can tweak any dietary pattern and still eat a healthy diet. But, very important caveat, make sure to fill any nutrient gaps. Most healthy adults on a diverse diet get all the nutrients they need, macronutrients, micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, and they don't need supplements. But if you're on a vegan diet, for example, you need a source of B12. If you don't have
Oh no! He's pissing the vegans off. Ah!
iodine in your diet, a lot of people don't eat fish or seafood. A lot of people are moving away from dairy. A lot of people are cutting back on salt, and those are the main sources of iodine. Make sure you have some iodine in there or a supplement. And as we said,
Great. You can also just eat meat because it supplies you with everything that you need. But, maybe that's a little too simple for you, right? Because you're all about simplicity, Gil. Maybe it's a little too simple. Maybe it's a little too simple for you. Or it's too complicated for you, actually. Maybe that's it. He can't wrap his head around it. He can't do it. Ophthalmology. What's this doing back there? He's got an ophthalmology book back there. He knows about the eyes.
eat to your blood work, eat to your tests, get blood analysis, measure blood.
No, you don't need to do that, Gil. There are very, very, very few blood tests that actually mean anything. And also they need to be contextualized. You're going to tell people to get blood tests so that they can compare them to the normative ranges that are based on sick people. Because how do you think they acquire the reference points? You think they just randomly went to people's houses? No, it's because they got it from people in doctor's offices that are actually visiting. Now, last I checked, I only go to the doctor whenever I need to. It's necessary. And even then, at that point, when is it ever necessary? When is it necessary?
Pressure, look in the mirror, and adjust and personalize based on that. Very powerful. This moves you away from the need to memorize every nutrient and knowing every study. Someone
Yeah, okay, so nobody needs to do that ever. In fact, you shouldn't be doing that. It's a waste of time. You are filling your brain with nonsense. You are filling your brain with literal junk. That's junk food for your brain.
scares you with an isolated molecule. You ask, what does a whole elephant look like? Someone shows you a spike after eating. You ask, does this matter long term? Is this specific to a disease setting that I don't have? And you can eat.
Oh my God. So that was a little bit of some snark thrown in there. A little bit of sarcasm. You shouldn't worry about blood glucose spikes unless you're diabetic. Unless you have gotten to the point where you're diabetic, then you start learning about it. Again, once you actually fall off the cliff, that's whenever you launch the parachute. You don't just avoid using the parachute ever. You keep playing on the edge until you fall, and then you do that, right? That's what we should encourage, right?
A treat once in a while and have
No.
peace of mind because you understand your health is
Have peace of mind is not the same thing as what you just said.
determined by what you do consistently.
That is also true. That doesn't mean that you should occasionally have the bad thing. In fact, that supports even further that you shouldn't be having the occasional bad thing.
Guys, I wrote this behemoth article covering every frequently asked question.
Behemoth. Okay, that isn't enticing, by the way. Nobody wants to read a behemoth article, by the way. Nobody wants that. Okay, and second of all, if it's going to be what we just listened to, why would we even go and look at that? It's just going to be the same nonsense. Wow, you're telling us what protein is. Okay, his niche is probably different. It's probably people that are being introduced to nutrition. They'll arrive at my space, maybe, eventually. But anyway.
That people ask me about nutrition, the cholesterol, the artificial sweeteners, the organic foods, the supplements, the nutrient deficiencies, the best sources. I'll link to that in the description. It's completely free access. There's no paid subscriptions, no sales ever. It also talks about intermittent fasting and it covers all kinds of popular diets. If you follow the link, I'll send you the entire article, no strings attached. And I'll also notify you when I publish a new video so you don't miss out. So check that out and I'll see you next time.
Okay, so that was it. That was all of the nonsense, right? So how do you feel about that? Do you feel enlightened? Do you feel like you've learned something? I hope you actually do. I'm sure that you do. I'm sure that you do feel enlightened. It's just a matter of who you feel enlightened from and what you feel enlightened from. Because it's not from Gil. I'll tell you that much. Gil didn't do a lot of enlightening. In fact, the only enlightening that he did was enlightening us to the fact that he doesn't understand the very field that he has spent decades in. That's impressive, isn't it? Impressive in the literal sense and also the sarcastic, sort of informal sense. It has left an impression on me, is what I mean. It is impressive in that sense. It should leave an impression on all of you. This is representative of most of the people in the health space. In fact, I would actually say that Gil is more reasonable than most of the people most of the researchers in the health space. He's actually one of the more reasonable ones, and that's saying something. He's still not reasonable. Gil, if you're watching this, I invite you to have a conversation with me, privately or publicly, but preferably publicly. In fact, I don't think that I would even entertain it if it was privately, unless you paid me, because my time is valuable. But nevertheless, I'd be willing to have the conversation because this needs to be stopped. This needs to be stopped in its tracks. I don't want to destroy you, Gil. I want to build you up. I want to make you someone that understands this stuff. Look, he talked about what was in his description. Oh, he's got this free article, whatever. That's great. That's great. I'm going to direct you to my description again, because if you want to actually understand how to decode health claims, any health claim someone throws at you, boom. That is the place to go. You have the 8 questions to ask first. There are not just 8 questions to ask, by the way. There's probably 100, but it's the 8 primary ones. It's the first 8. They're the most fundamental, foundational ones. Link is in the description to get your hands on that, to acquire it. First name, email, done. And as he said, it's free. There's no strings attached. And you get my free newsletter, weekly newsletter, and you can unsubscribe at any time if you don't want that. But yeah, there you go. There you go. So with that said, if you are someone that understands that human nutrition science is far from the proper and appropriate lens by which you should be looking at health through and assessing what is appropriate to eat and what is inappropriate to eat, what you should be eating, what is healthy, what is not, all that stuff. And you understand that the lens that provides you with clarity is evolutionary biology and anthropology. You understand all these things. You understand that the species we are one member, or we are members of one species. And therefore we have a species-appropriate, species-specific set of behaviors, and that includes diet. If you understand all of this, like this video, if you want to see carnivore thrive and succeed and defeat nonsense, if you want to see truth defeat falsehoods, like the video. Comment your thoughts below on this. Comment in the chat. Here, I am reading everything in moderation. The moderation in question being under any amount that could kill you in a day, week tops. Yeah. Well, Eddie, do you do your normal videos in one take? Because your live streams feel like just your normal vids. Yeah, most of the time I do. There we go. Okay, I'm only reading that much. But I am seeing it. But leave your thoughts in the comment section below. And if you want to see more material like this, I don't need to tell you what to do. You already know what to do. So do it. And with that said, I will see you in the next one whenever we are reacting to more nonsense online, because it seems like it is everywhere. It doesn't seem like it's everywhere. It is everywhere and needs to be stopped. And I am a defender of truth. I am a crusader, and I will do it. Okay. Anyway, till then.